Blood soaked through Clara Reynolds' dress as flames devoured everything she'd ever known. Her father lay dead in the ashes, murdered by men who wanted their land. She ran through the Wyoming darkness. Certain death was hunting her, until a stranger's shadow fell across her path. Elias Grant, the cowboy who would change everything, dismounted in silence. That night, for the first time in her 19 years, Clara would sleep beside a man. He asked for nothing. He gave her everything. Stay with me until the end of this story and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The smell reached Clara Reynolds before the sight did. Acrid smoke mixing with prairie wind, turning her stomach even as her legs pumped harder through the tall grass. Behind her, orange light painted the Wyoming sky the color of damnation. The Winchester rifle her father had pressed into her hands 20 minutes ago grew heavier with each stumbling step, but she didn't dare let it go. It was the only thing standing between her and the men whose laughter still echoed across the homestead she'd fled. "Run, Clara girl! Don't look back! Get to the creek and follow it north! Don't stop! Don't—" Her father's final words had been cut short by gunfire. 3 shots, then silence worse than any scream. Clara's boot caught on a root and she went down hard, the impact driving air from her lungs. The rifle clattered away into darkness. For a moment she lay there in the dirt, gasping like a landed fish, her right shoulder screaming with a pain that felt white-hot and spreading. When she'd crashed through the window of her burning home, she'd thought the wood frame had just scraped her. Now pressing her left hand to the wound, her fingers came away dark and wet. Not scraped, shot. The realization hit her harder than the fall. One of Voss's men had actually shot her. They'd burned her home, killed her father, and put a bullet through a 19-year-old woman who'd never done anything worse than refuse to sell her family's water rights to a cattle baron who already owned half of Johnson County. "She went this way!" The shout came from perhaps 200 yards back, near the ruins of what had been, until tonight, the only home Clara had ever known. "Blood trail's fresh!" Terror gave her strength. Clara pushed herself up, biting back a whimper as her shoulder protested. She couldn't see the rifle in the darkness. Couldn't waste time searching. She had to move, had to— Her legs buckled. She caught herself against a cottonwood trunk, bark rough under her palm. The world tilted sideways, then righted itself in sickening waves. How much blood had she lost? Her dress clung to her side, heavy and wet. Her father had taught her about wounds, about cattle and horses that bled out in minutes when an artery got cut. Was she bleeding out? Was this how it ended? Alone in the dark while her father's murderers closed in? "Please," Clara whispered to the indifferent stars overhead. "Please, I don't want to die like this." The stars didn't answer. They never did. She pushed away from the tree and made herself walk. 1 foot, then another. The creek her father had mentioned was somewhere ahead. She could hear water moving over stones, that eternal whisper that had been the soundtrack to her childhood. If she could reach it, maybe she could lose them in the darkness. Maybe she could make it to the Hendersons' place 5 miles north. Maybe— Clara's boot hit a patch of loose shale and her ankle twisted. This time when she fell, she didn't get back up. She lay on her side in the tall grass, watching her own blood seep into Wyoming soil, and felt something inside her simply give up. She was so tired, so cold. The pain in her shoulder had faded to a distant throb, which probably meant something bad, but she couldn't remember what. Behind her, the voices drew closer. She could make out words now. "Probably dead already. Voss said no witnesses. We find the body. We're done here." "Shame. She was a pretty little thing." Rough laughter, the kind that made Clara's skin crawl even through the gathering fog in her mind. She closed her eyes. Maybe if she was very still, very quiet, death would come gentle. Maybe it wouldn't hurt much more than it already did. The ground trembled. Hoofbeats. Multiple horses moving fast through the darkness. Clara's eyes opened despite herself. Were there more of them? How many men did it take to murder one cattle rancher and his daughter? "What the hell, so—" The voice that had been laughing cut off sharp. Clara heard curses, the sound of men scrambling. More hoofbeats, these ones moving away at a gallop. Running, but from what? A new sound reached her, a single horse, moving at an easy lope, coming closer. Clara tried to push herself up, managed to get one elbow under her before her strength failed. She collapsed back into the grass, fingers clutching at nothing, as a shadow fell across her like a shroud. The horse stopped. Leather creaked as someone dismounted. Boot falls, measured and careful, approaching where she lay. This is it, Clara thought distantly. One of them came back to finish it. She waited for the gunshot. Instead, she heard a man's voice, low and rough as creek gravel. Jesus Christ. Hands touched her, careful hands, testing her throat for a pulse, then moving to her wounded shoulder. Clara tried to pull away, but her body wouldn't respond. The best she could manage was a weak sound that might have been protest or plea. Easy now. The voice again, gentler this time. I'm not going to hurt you. Can you hear me, miss? Clara forced her eyes to focus. The man kneeling beside her was a stranger, or maybe not quite a stranger. Even through the haze of shock and blood loss, some part of her recognized him. The rider who sometimes passed through on his way to the line camps. The tall one with the weathered face who always tipped his hat to her father. She'd seen him maybe 3, 4 times in as many years. Never spoken to him. Didn't know his name. The ranch, she managed, her voice a rasp she barely recognized. They burned. My father. I know. I saw the smoke from Owl Creek by the time I got there. He shook his head, his features shadowed and hard to read in the starlight. I'm sorry, but right now we need to worry about you. You're hit bad. Bleeding heavy. I need to get you somewhere I can tend this properly. They'll come back, Clara whispered. Voss's men. They'll find me. Not tonight, they won't. Something in his tone made it sound like a promise carved in stone. I fired over their heads, spooked their horses. They're halfway to the Powder River by now, and they're not coming back in darkness to face an unknown gun. He slid his arms beneath her, one under her shoulders, one under her knees, and lifted her as if she weighed nothing at all. The movement sent pain lancing through her shoulder, sharp enough to drag a cry from her throat. The world grayed at the edges. I know. I'm sorry. Stay with me now. Clara felt herself being settled across a saddle, felt the man swing up behind her. His arm came around her waist, holding her steady against his chest as the horse started moving. She tried to speak, to ask where they were going, who he was, but the words wouldn't come. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and the darkness that had been creeping at the edges of her vision rushed in like floodwater. The last thing she heard was that gravel-rough voice. I've got you. You're safe now. Then nothing at all. Clara woke to firelight dancing against rough log walls. For a confused moment, she thought she was home, in her own bed, in the room she'd had since childhood. Then pain flared in her shoulder, and memory crashed back like an avalanche. The flames, the gunshots, her father's face as he'd pushed her toward the window, the long, desperate run through darkness. She gasped and tried to sit up, a hand pressed gently against her uninjured shoulder, easing her back down. Slow. Don't tear those stitches. The stranger. The rider who'd found her. Clara turned her head and found him kneeling beside the narrow cot where she lay. In the firelight, she could see him clearly for the first time. A man perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair that needed cutting and a face that looked like it had been carved from the same granite as the mountains. Not handsome exactly, but striking in a way that made you look twice. His eyes were gray as winter clouds, and they studied her with an intensity that made her want to look away. She didn't look away. Where am I? Her voice came out dry as autumn leaves. Line shack about 3 miles north of where I found you. Used to belong to the Box T outfit before they moved their operation west. He reached for something beside the cot and held out a tin cup. Water, small sips. Clara let him help her drink. The water was cold and tasted faintly of creekstone. She'd never tasted anything better in her life. When she'd had enough, he set the cup aside and sat back on his heels, watching her with those steady gray eyes. How do you feel? Like I've been shot. The words came out sharper than she'd intended, but the man's mouth quirked in something that might have been a smile. Fair enough. You were lucky. Bullet went through clean, missed the bone. Lost a good amount of blood, but nothing I couldn't handle. He gestured toward her shoulder, which she now realized was bound in clean white bandages that hadn't been there before. Had to stitch it up. Did the best I could, but you'll want a proper doctor to look at it soon as possible. Clara stared at the bandages, then at him. You did this? The stitches? Yes, ma'am. Are you a doctor? No, ma'am, but I've sewed up enough men and a few women to know my way around a needle. His voice carried no pride in the statement, just fact. Was a marshal down in New Mexico territory for a time. Before that, cavalry surgeon's assistant during the Indian campaigns. You learn what you need to learn. A marshal. That explained the steady hands, the calm in crisis. Clara tried to process this information through the fog still lingering in her mind. She was in a line shack 3 miles from her destroyed home, alone with a stranger who said he'd been a lawman. She should probably be afraid. Should probably be demanding he take her to town, to people she knew, to safety. But she'd been in his arms for 3 miles through darkness, and he hadn't hurt her, had in fact saved her life. And there was something in his face, something weary and honest, that made her instincts quiet their warnings. "What's your name?" she asked. "Elias Grant." "I'm Clara Reynolds. My father was—" Her voice broke. She had to swallow hard before continuing. "Thomas Reynolds. The ranch they burned, that was ours." "I know." Elias's face didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Recognition. Sorrow. "I'm sorry for your loss, Miss Reynolds. Your father was a good man. Traded with him a few times when I was working for the Box T." Clara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. If she started crying now, she might never stop. And she needed to think, needed to understand what had happened and why. "It was Voss," she said, her voice harder now. "Randall Voss and his men. They wanted our water rights. Our land borders Little Piney Creek, and we've got the only reliable water source between here and the mountains. Voss has been trying to buy us out for 2 years. My father kept refusing. So Voss decided to take it by force." Elias's tone was neutral, but his jaw tightened. "That tracks. Voss isn't known for accepting no as an answer." "You know him?" "Of him. Man like that casts a long shadow in Johnson County. Owns the Circle 5, biggest spread in the territory. Got judges in his pocket, probably a few lawmen too." He paused, studying her face. "Which means you're in a tough spot, Miss Reynolds. If you go to the sheriff in Buffalo, odds are Voss already owns him. If you try to testify to what happened, you might not live long enough to make it to court." The words should have frightened her. Instead, they lit something hot and sharp in Clara's chest. "So he just gets away with it? Murders my father and burns our home and faces no consequences?" "I didn't say that." Elias stood and moved to the fireplace, adding wood to the flames. "But you need to be smart about this. Going up against Voss head-on is suicide. You need allies. You need a plan. Most of all, you need to heal up before you do anything else." Clara pushed herself up on her good elbow, ignoring the way her vision swam. "I can't just hide here. I have to—" "You have to rest." Elias turned back to her, his voice firm but not unkind. "It's 3 hours till dawn. You've lost enough blood to put most men on their backs for a week. Your body needs time to recover, and this shack is as safe a place as any for tonight." "And tomorrow?" "Tomorrow we figure out next steps. You have family? Anyone you can go to?" Clara thought of her mother's sister in Haven Creek, up in the Medicine Bow Mountains. Aunt Ida, who ran a boarding house and had offered Clara a place a dozen times over the years. Clara had always refused, not wanting to leave her father alone on the ranch. Now her father was dead and the ranch was ash, and refusing seemed like the stupidest decision she'd ever made. "My aunt," she said quietly. "Ida Raymond. She runs a boarding house in Haven Creek." Elias nodded. "I know the place. It's a hard 3 days ride from here. 4 if we take the safe routes. Mountain trails, most of it. You up for that kind of travel?" "Do I have a choice?" "No, ma'am. Not really." He moved back to the cot and crouched beside her. "But I need to know you can handle it. Those mountains aren't forgiving, especially not for someone in your condition. If you think you can't make it, say so now. We'll find another way." Clara met his eyes. In the firelight, they looked almost silver. "I can make it." "All right, then. We'll rest here tonight and start out at first light. I'll need to go back to your place before we leave, see if there's anything we can salvage. Food, supplies, anything that might help us on the trail." "It's all gone." Clara's throat tightened. "Everything burned." "Maybe, but fire's funny sometimes. Leaves things you wouldn't expect. He stood again, moved to the far side of the small shack where his saddle and gear were piled. You should try to sleep more. Body heals faster when you rest. I don't think I can sleep. It was true. Despite the exhaustion weighing on her like wet wool, Clara's mind was racing. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw flames, heard her father's voice telling her to run, felt the bullet tear through her shoulder. Elias was quiet for a moment, then moved back to the cot. To Clara's surprise, he settled himself on the floor beside it, his back against the wall, close enough that she could have reached out and touched his shoulder. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Keeping watch. If Voss's men get brave and come looking, I want to hear them coming." "You don't have to." "Yes, ma'am, I do." He pulled his hat down low over his eyes, but Clara could see he wasn't sleeping. His hand rested easy on the rifle prop beside him. "Try to rest, Miss Reynolds. I'll wake you if there's trouble." Clara lay back, her good hand resting on her stomach, staring at the ceiling. The presence of the man beside her cot should have made her uneasy. She'd been raised proper, had barely spoken to men outside her family, let alone been alone with one in a remote line shack. But instead of fear, she felt something else entirely, something that might have been safety. "Mr. Grant?" "Elias is fine." "Elias, why did you help me? You could have just ridden away. Most people would have." Silence. For so long that Clara thought he might not answer. Then, "I saw my sister die when I was 16. She was about your age. Got caught in crossfire during a bank robbery in Kansas. Bullet took her in the chest. She died in the street while I held her and people just walked past. Nobody stopped. Nobody helped. I swore that day I'd never be the man who walks past someone in need." The raw honesty in his voice made Clara's chest ache. "I'm sorry. About your sister." "Me too." He shifted slightly, adjusting his position. "Get some sleep, Clara. Morning comes early." It was the first time he'd used her given name. She should have corrected him, insisted on propriety. Instead, she found it oddly comforting, one small kindness in a night of horror. Clara closed her eyes. She didn't expect sleep to come, but exhaustion had other ideas. Her last conscious thought was awareness of the man beside her cot, solid as stone, standing watch while she finally let herself drift. When she jerked awake sometime later, she didn't know how long, couldn't tell in the darkness. Her heart was hammering and tears streaked her face. The nightmare had been vivid, her father's face, the flames, the laughter of the men hunting her. "Easy." Elias's voice came from the darkness beside her, low and calm. "You're safe. Just a dream." Clara's breath came in ragged gasps. She couldn't seem to slow it down, couldn't stop the shaking that had seized her limbs. Without thinking, she reached out blindly and found his arm, solid, real, anchoring her to something besides the nightmare. "I can't." She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't explain the terror that had her in its grip. Elias didn't ask her to explain. He simply moved closer, sitting on the edge of the cot now, his presence a bulwark against the dark. "Focus on breathing. In through your nose, out through your mouth. That's it. You're doing fine." She tried to follow his instructions, tried to calm the racing of her heart. It took long minutes, but gradually the panic receded. Gradually, her breathing evened out. But the shaking wouldn't stop, and the cold had sunk so deep into her bones that her teeth chattered. "Shock," Elias said quietly, as if diagnosing a patient. "Your body's catching up to what happened. You need warmth." He hesitated, then added, "I can build up the fire, or?" "Or?" Clara managed through chattering teeth. "Or I can sit beside you. Body heat works faster than fire. But I won't do anything improper, Miss Reynolds. You have my word." Clara should have said no, should have insisted on propriety, on the rules she'd been raised to follow. But she was so cold and so scared, and the thought of facing the night alone made something in her chest crack open. "Please," she whispered. Elias moved carefully, settling himself on the cot beside her, his back against the wall. He didn't pull her close, didn't do anything except sit there, solid and warm, close enough that his presence pushed back the worst of the cold. Clara turned toward him without quite meaning to, her uninjured side pressed against his. She felt his arm come around her shoulders, carefully, respectfully, and then his warmth surrounded her like a blanket. "Sleep," he said quietly. I've got you. For the first time in her 19 years, Clara Reynolds fell asleep beside a man. He didn't ask for anything she wasn't ready to give. He didn't take anything she didn't offer. He simply held her through the darkest hours of the worst night of her life and kept the nightmares at bay with his presence. When she woke again, gray dawn light was seeping through the cracks in the shack's walls. Elias was still beside her, still awake, still keeping watch. Their eyes met in the growing light. "Thank you," Clara said softly. Elias nodded once. "We should move soon. Sun's up means Voss's men will be too. You ready to ride?" Clara thought of her father, of her burned home, of the 3-day journey ahead through mountain wilderness with a stranger who'd become something more in the space of one night. She thought of her aunt in Haven Creek and the testimony she'd give against Randall Voss if it was the last thing she ever did. "I'm ready," she said. And she was. The morning air bit cold as they left the line shack behind, frost glittering on the prairie grass like scattered diamonds. Clara sat in front of Elias on his bay gelding, her body stiff from pain and the awkwardness of their position. His arms stayed firm around her waist, keeping her steady in the saddle, and she tried not to think about how close they were or how improper this would look to anyone who saw them. Propriety seemed like a luxury she could no longer afford. They rode in silence for the better part of an hour, the horses' hooves muffled on the soft earth. Behind them, a column of smoke still rose from what had been the Reynolds ranch, thinner now, just gray wisps against the brightening sky, but visible for miles. Clara forced herself not to look back. Looking back wouldn't change anything, wouldn't bring her father home or rebuild the house her grandfather had constructed with his own hands 40 years ago. "We'll swing by your place quick," Elias said, his voice low near her ear. "Stay mounted while I check what's left. If I see any sign of Voss's men, we run. Understood?" "Understood." Clara's throat felt tight. "But I need something. If anything survived." "What's that?" "My mother's Bible. It was in the sideboard in the front room. She died when I was 8. That Bible is all I have left of her." Elias was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "I'll look for it. No promises, but I'll look." 20 minutes later, they crested a low rise, and Clara's destroyed home came into view. In daylight, the devastation looked even worse. Blackened timbers jutting up like broken bones, the stone chimney standing alone amid the ruins like a gravestone. The barn had collapsed entirely, just a heap of charred wood. The chicken coop was gone. Even the vegetable garden her father had so carefully tended showed boot prints and destruction, as if Voss's men had made a point of trampling it. Clara's eyes burned, but she wouldn't let herself cry. Not yet. Not while Elias was watching. He guided the horse in a wide circle around the property, his eyes constantly scanning for movement. When he seemed satisfied they were alone, he dismounted and handed her the reins. "Stay ready to run," he said quietly, then moved toward the ruins with his rifle in hand. Clara watched him pick through the wreckage with quick efficiency, moving debris with his boot, occasionally bending to examine something more closely. The morning sun caught on what was left of the front room, just pieces of the sideboard scattered among ash and fallen beams. Elias crouched there for several minutes, carefully shifting through the destruction. When he stood and turned back toward her, he was carrying something wrapped in his bandana. He swung back into the saddle behind her and placed the bundle in her lap without a word. Clara unwrapped it with shaking hands. The Bible's leather cover was scorched, and one corner had burned away completely, but the pages inside were mostly intact, protected by the heavy sideboard that had fallen over it. She opened it carefully and found her mother's handwriting on the inside cover, Sarah Reynolds, 1851, still legible despite water damage and smoke stains. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching the Bible to her chest with her good arm. Elias's response was to nudge the horse into motion, turning them away from the ruins. "We need to move. Those tracks around the property are fresh, no more than a few hours old. Voss's men came back at first light, probably looking for your body." A chill ran down Clara's spine that had nothing to do with the morning cold. "They'll realize I'm not there. Already have, most likely, which means they'll be looking for you." He urged the horse into an easy lope, heading northwest toward the mountains visible on the horizon. "We need to put distance between us and them. Fast as we can while still being careful with your shoulder." "How long until we reach Haven Creek?" 3 days if we push hard and the weather holds. 4 if it doesn't, or if we run into trouble. He paused, then added, You hurting? Tell me truth. Clara considered lying, then decided against it. Yes, but I can manage. We'll stop in a few hours. Let you rest. For now, try to relax against me. Fighting the horse's movement is just going to make the pain worse. It went against everything Clara had been taught about proper behavior between unmarried men and women, but she was too tired and hurt to care anymore. She let herself lean back slightly against Elias's chest, and immediately the jarring of the horse's gait became easier to bear. They rode through country Clara had never seen before, Elias keeping them off the main trails, following creek beds and deer paths that wound through increasingly rough terrain. By mid-morning, they'd climbed high enough that prairie gave way to pine forest, the air turning crisp with mountain cold. Clara's shoulder throbbed with each of the horse's steps, and despite her best efforts, she couldn't stop the occasional whimper when pain spiked particularly sharp. Almost there, Elias said each time, his voice steady. Just a little further. When they finally stopped, the sun was high overhead, and Clara felt dizzy with exhaustion and pain. Elias dismounted first, then lifted her down with careful hands. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet touched ground. Easy. His hand stayed on her waist, steadying her. Let's get you sitting down. He guided her to a fallen log near a small creek, then moved off to tend the horse. Clara sat with her eyes closed, listening to the sound of water over stones and trying to breathe through the waves of pain. When Elias returned, he had his canteen in a small cloth bag. Drink this. He handed her the canteen. Slow sips. The water was cold enough to make her teeth ache, but it cleared some of the fog from her head. When she'd had enough, Elias opened the cloth bag and pulled out a piece of dried jerky. Eat. You need to keep your strength up. Clara took the jerky but couldn't make herself bite into it. Her stomach rolled at the thought of food. I'm not hungry. Don't care. Eat anyway. Your body needs fuel to heal. His tone left no room for argument. She forced herself to chew a small piece. It tasted like leather and salt, but she swallowed it down and took another bite. Elias nodded approval and moved to check the bandage on her shoulder. It's seeping some, he said, his fingers gentle against the cloth. Not bad, but we'll need to change it tonight. You got any fever? I don't know, maybe? He pressed the back of his hand to her forehead, then her cheek. His touch was completely impersonal, clinical, but Clara felt heat rise in her face anyway. Little warm, but nothing to worry about yet. We'll watch it. You've done this before. It wasn't a question. Too many times. Elias settled onto the log beside her, not quite touching, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. War teaches you things you'd rather not know. How to stitch wounds, how to tell when a man's going to make it or not. How to keep moving when every bone in your body wants to quit. Clara turned to look at him. In the dappled sunlight filtering through pine branches, his face looked younger than it had in the firelight, or maybe just more exposed. How old were you during the war? Enlisted at 16, lied about my age, spent 3 years with the cavalry before mustering out in 68. His eyes were distant, seeing something she couldn't. Long time ago now. That's why you know these trails so well, from your cavalry days. That and working cattle drives. I've crossed most of Wyoming territory at one point or another. Learned early on that the safe trails aren't always the obvious ones. Clara took another reluctant bite of jerky. Where are you from? Originally, I mean. Kansas. Little town called Abilene. Not much there worth remembering. He stood, moving to refill the canteen from the creek. We should rest here another hour, then push on. Want to make good distance before dark. Elias. She waited until he looked at her. Thank you for all of this. I know you didn't have to. Oh, stop thanking me. His voice wasn't unkind, just firm. What happened to you and your father was wrong, plain as that. I'm just doing what anyone decent would do. Most people aren't decent. No, he agreed quietly. They're not. But that doesn't mean we stop trying to be. He came back and handed her the refilled canteen. Finish the jerky, then try to rest. I'll keep watch. Clara did as she was told, forcing down the dried meat despite her protesting stomach. When she'd finished, she found herself leaning back against the log, her eyes drifting closed despite her intention to stay alert. The sound of the creek was soothing, and the pine-scented air was so different from the smoke-filled nightmare of last night that it almost didn't seem real. She must have dozed because the next thing she knew, Elias was gently shaking her good shoulder. "Time to move, Clara. Sun's starting to drop." The afternoon passed in a blur of pine forests and narrow mountain trails. Twice they had to dismount and lead the horse over particularly rough terrain. Each time, Elias helped Clara navigate the obstacles with a steady hand at her back, his patience never wavering even when she stumbled or had to stop to catch her breath. By the time sunset painted the sky orange and gold, Clara was so exhausted she could barely sit upright in the saddle. "There." Elias pointed ahead to where the trees thinned slightly. "See that clearing? We'll camp there tonight." The clearing was small but sheltered, with a rock overhang that would provide some protection if it rained. A thin stream ran along one edge, barely more than a trickle, but enough for water. Elias helped Clara down from the horse and got her settled on a flat patch of ground while he tended to the animal and built a small fire. "No coffee, I'm afraid," he said as he worked. "Don't want the smell carrying too far, but I've got more jerky and some hardtack that's only moderately lethal." Despite everything, Clara felt a smile tug at her lips. "Sounds delicious." Liar. But his tone was warm. "Here, eat what you can." They ate in silence as darkness settled over the mountains. The temperature dropped fast once the sun disappeared, and Clara found herself shivering despite the fire. Her shoulder ached with a deep, throbbing pain that made her nauseous, and her head felt fuzzy in a way that worried her. Elias noticed. He always seemed to notice. "Fever's climbing. Come here." He moved to sit with his back against the rock face and gestured for her to join him. When Clara hesitated, he raised an eyebrow. "We did this last night and you survived. Stop being stubborn and get over here before you freeze." She went, settling carefully beside him. He wrapped his coat around both of them, his arm coming around her shoulders to hold the fabric in place. The warmth was immediate and desperately welcome. "Better?" he asked. "Yes. Thank you." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder without thinking, then stiffened. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't—" "Clara," he cut her off gently. "We're 3 days from anywhere. You're hurt and feverish, and there's a cattle baron's men somewhere behind us who'd like nothing more than to see you dead. I think we can dispense with worrying about propriety, all right?" "All right," she whispered. They sat quiet for a while, watching the fire burn down to embers. Above them, stars emerged in impossible numbers, far more than Clara had ever seen from the ranch. The Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light. "My mother used to tell me stories about the stars," Clara said softly. "Said they were campfires of our ancestors, watching over us. I always thought that was silly. Now, I'm not so sure." "Your father ever remarry?" Elias asked. "After your mother passed?" "No. He said she was the only woman for him, that some people only get one great love in their life, and he'd already had his." Claire's voice caught. "He was lonely, though. I could see it in his eyes sometimes, especially in winter when the days were short and there wasn't much work to do. He'd sit by the fire and stare at nothing, and I knew he was thinking of her. Must have been hard for both of you." "It was, but we managed. We always managed." Tears pricked her eyes. "I keep thinking I'll wake up, and this will all be a nightmare. That I'll be in my own bed and I'll hear my father in the kitchen making breakfast. He always sang while he cooked. Old songs from his time in the army. Terrible voice, but he didn't care." Elias's arm tightened slightly around her shoulders. "Tell me about him, if you want." So Clara did. She told Elias about Thomas Reynolds, how he'd come to Wyoming Territory after the war with nothing but a horse and determination. How he'd built the ranch from nothing, working brutal hours to turn raw land into something productive. How he'd taught her to ride when she was 5, to shoot when she was 10, to keep accounts when she was 12, because he said a woman needed to know business as well as any man. "He wasn't perfect," Clara said. "He was stubborn as a mule, and he never met a fight he wouldn't take on. But he was good, truly good. He paid his hands fair wages, treated everyone with respect, gave water to neighbors during droughts, even when we barely had enough for ourselves. That's why Voss hated him. My father wouldn't bend, wouldn't compromise his principles for money or an easy life. Sounds like you take after him. I hope so. Clara closed her eyes, letting herself sink deeper into Elias's warmth. Elias, what happens if we get to Haven Creek and Voss finds us there? We'll deal with it if it happens. Your aunt's place. It's in the mountains, harder to get to. Voss's reach doesn't extend as far up there. You'll be safer than you were on the plains. But not completely safe. No, he admitted. Not completely, but safer. And that's what we need right now. Time for you to heal. Time to figure out our next move. Our? Clara tilted her head to look up at him. You're planning to stay? Elias was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the dying fire. I haven't decided yet, but I'm not going to leave you defenseless if Voss comes calling. That much I know. Something warm bloomed in Clara's chest that had nothing to do with fever. Why are you doing this, really? It can't just be about your sister. Can it? You could have taken me to town, dropped me with the sheriff or a doctor, and washed your hands of the whole thing. Instead, you're riding 3 days into the mountains with a half-dead woman and making yourself a target for Randall Voss's men. Why? Elias looked down at her, his gray eyes unreadable in the firelight. Maybe I'm tired of watching bad men win. Maybe I spent too many years enforcing laws that only seem to protect people with money and power. Maybe... He stopped, shook his head. It doesn't matter why. I'm here. That's enough. But Clara suspected it did matter, very much, in ways she didn't yet understand. The fever climbed through the night despite Elias's efforts. Clara drifted in and out of fitful sleep, her dreams full of fire and gunshots and her father's voice calling her name. Each time she woke, Elias was there, pressing a cool cloth to her forehead, helping her drink water, speaking in low, steady tones that cut through the worst of the nightmares. Can you hear me, Clara? Stay with me now. That's it. Just breathe. Sometime deep in the night, when the fever peaked and she couldn't stop shaking despite being wrapped in every blanket they had, Clara felt Elias pull her closer, one arm around her back, the other cradling her head against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, steady as a drum, and she focused on that sound to anchor herself against the fever dreams. Cold, she managed through chattering teeth. So cold. I know, I've got you. You're going to be all right. Don't leave me. I won't, I promise. His voice was quiet but absolute. Sleep now. I'll keep watch. When Clara woke again, gray dawn light was filtering through the trees and the fever had broken. She lay still for a moment, orienting herself. She was still wrapped in Elias's arms, her cheek pressed against his chest, his coat spread over both of them. He was asleep. Actually asleep. His head tilted back against the rock, his face relaxed in a way she'd never seen it. She should move, should put proper distance between them, but she was warm for the first time in what felt like days, and his steady breathing was oddly comforting, and the thought of facing the cold morning air made her want to burrow deeper into the blankets. Elias's eyes opened suddenly, instantly alert. He looked down at her, and for just a moment something unguarded crossed his face. Concern, relief, something else she couldn't quite name. Then his usual controlled expression slid back into place. Fever broke, he observed. How do you feel? Like I've been trampled by horses, but better than yesterday. Clara sat up slowly, immediately missing his warmth. Did you sleep at all? Some. Enough. He stood and stretched, joints popping. We should move soon. Make good time while you're feeling stronger. Elias. She waited until he looked at her. Thank you. For last night. Stop thanking me. No. Clara pushed herself to her feet, swaying only slightly. You keep saying that, but I won't stop. You could have left me to die in that grass. You could have taken me to town and forgotten about me. Instead, you've ridden into the middle of nowhere and sat up all night keeping me from burning up with fever. I'm going to thank you as many times as I damn well please. A smile ghosted across his face, the first real one she'd seen from him. Stubborn. Grateful. Both then. He began packing up their meager camp. Eat some jerky while I get the horse ready. We've got hard riding ahead. They pushed northwest through increasingly rugged country. The mountains rose higher around them, pine forests giving way to bare rock and alpine meadows. Twice they had to backtrack when trails proved impassable. Once they spent an hour hiding in a dense thicket while riders passed within a quarter-mile. Voss's men, or just random travelers, Clara couldn't tell, but Elias wouldn't risk exposure. Late in the afternoon of that second day, they crested a rise and found themselves looking down into a narrow valley. At the bottom, beside a stream that sparkled in the sunlight, stood a small camp, just a single tent and the remains of a fire. "Wait here." Elias dismounted and moved forward on foot, rifle ready. Clara watched him approach the camp cautiously, saw him call out a greeting, saw a figure emerge from the tent. An old man. Even from a distance, Clara could see the white beard, the stooped shoulders. Elias spoke with him for several minutes, then turned and waved Clara forward. She rode down carefully, her hand on the rifle Elias had given her that morning. As she drew closer, the old man came into focus, ancient and weathered as the mountains themselves, with eyes that were sharp despite his age. "Well now," he said, his voice surprisingly strong, "what's a pretty young lady like you doing way out here with a bullet hole in her shoulder?" Clara glanced at Elias, who shrugged. "This is Silas Perkins. He's a prospector. Been working these mountains for near 40 years, according to him." "Closer to 50, but who's counting?" Silas grinned, revealing more gaps than teeth. "And you'd be Clara Reynolds. Word travels fast, even in the high country. Heard about the fire at your pa's place. Heard you might be dead." "I'm not dead." Clara dismounted, accepting Elias's steadying hand. Obviously. Silas looked between them, his sharp eyes missing nothing. "You two heading to Haven Creek?" "Yes, sir," Elias said. "Know it?" "Know everything in these mountains. And I know the trails between here and there are crawling with Voss's men. They're offering a reward, $500 for information about Miss Reynolds here. Dead or alive, though I suspect Voss would prefer dead." Clara's blood went cold. $500, that's a fortune to most people in these parts, Silas finished. "But you're lucky. You ran into one of the few men in Wyoming territory who doesn't need Randall Voss's blood money." He gestured toward his tent. "Come on. Both of you look like you could use a hot meal and a few hours' rest. I've got stew on and bread baking. Not much, but it's honest food." "We can't impose," Clara started. "Nonsense. Any enemy of Randall Voss is a friend of mine. That bastard ran me off a perfectly good claim 10 years back, said it was on Circle 5 land even though I'd been working it for 5 years. Come on now, before the stew gets cold." The stew was venison and wild onions, thick and rich, and the best thing Clara had tasted in days. Silas's bread was heavy and slightly burned, but after 2 days of jerky and hardtack, it might as well have been from a fancy restaurant. Clara ate until her stomach felt near to bursting while Silas and Elias talked in low voices about trails and weather and the movements of Voss's men through the mountains. "They're watching the main trails," Silas said, "but there's an old game trail that runs north along Cascade Creek, then cuts west through Devil's Gap. Rough going, especially for a lady who's been shot, but it'll get you to Haven Creek without running into anyone who'd turn you over to Voss." "How rough?" Elias asked. "Some climbing. Few places you'll have to lead the horse. Nothing you can't handle if you're careful." Silas turned to Clara. "You up for it, miss?" Clara thought about her father, about justice, about making it to Haven Creek alive. "I'm up for it." "That's the spirit." Silas disappeared into his tent and emerged with a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. "Here, take this. It was my wife's before she passed. Blue dress, good wool. You can't go riding into Haven Creek looking like you've been dragged behind a horse. People will talk." Clara unwrapped the bundle carefully. The dress inside was faded but well made, with careful stitching and buttons that still shined. "I can't take your wife's dress." "You can and you will. Martha would have wanted it. She never could stand seeing a woman in need go without." Silas's voice was gruff, but his eyes were kind. "Besides, what am I going to do with it? Wear it myself? I'm too old and too ugly for blue." Despite everything, Clara laughed, the first real laugh since before the fire. "Thank you, Mr. Perkins. I'll take good care of it." "See that you do. And when you get to Haven Creek, you tell Ida Raymond that old Silas sent you. She and I go way back. She'll take good care of you." They rested at Silas's camp through the afternoon. Clara sleeping heavily while Elias and the old prospector talked. When she woke, the sun was lowering toward the western peaks, and Silas was sketching a map in the dirt with a stick. "Here's where you are now," he said, pointing. "Here's Cascade Creek. Follow it north for about 6 hours, then watch for the cutoff to Devil's Gap. It's marked with a cairn, pile of rocks about waist high. Don't miss it, or you'll end up in country too rough even for mountain goats." Elias studied the map intently, then nodded. "We'll leave at first light." "No." Silas shook his head. "You'll leave now. There's a full moon tonight, and the trail along the creek is clear enough. If Voss's men are smart, and some of them are, they'll have figured out by now that you didn't take the main trails. That means they'll start searching the back country. Every hour you sit still is an hour they get closer." Clara's stomach dropped. "They're coming?" "Maybe, maybe not. But do you want to bet your life on maybe?" Silas stood, already moving to help pack their things. "Go now. Moon will light your way, and by tomorrow morning you'll be through Devil's Gap and home free." 20 minutes later they were mounted and ready to move. Silas handed Elias a small pouch, dried meat and some herbs for fever, and this. He pressed something into Clara's hand, a small silver locket on a delicate chain. It was Martha's too. "She'd want you to have it, for luck." Clara's throat was too tight to speak. She just nodded and clutched the locket in her fist. "Go on now," Silas said. "And miss, when you bring Voss down, and you will bring him down, I can see it in your eyes. You make sure he knows old Silas helped you. I want him to know exactly who stuck the knife in." "I will," Clara promised. "Thank you for everything." They rode out as the sun touched the horizon, painting the world gold and crimson. Clara looked back once to see Silas standing beside his tent, one hand raised in farewell. Then they descended into the tree line, and he was lost to sight. The night ride was surreal. The full moon turned the landscape into something from a dream, all silver and shadow, familiar and foreign at once. Cascade Creek ran beside them, its voice a constant companion. Elias kept them moving at a steady pace, neither rushing nor dawdling, his eyes constantly scanning the trail ahead. They rode for hours in near silence, speaking only when necessary to navigate difficult terrain. Around midnight, they stopped briefly to water the horse and rest. Clara slid from the saddle and immediately had to catch herself against a tree when her legs threatened to give out. "Easy." Elias was there in an instant, his hand steadying her. "You all right?" "Just tired and sore, and every other unpleasant thing." She managed a weak smile. "But alive. That's something. That's everything." His hands lingered on her arms for just a moment longer than necessary. Then he stepped back. "Drink some water. We'll rest 10 minutes, then push on. Silas was right. We need to make Devil's Gap before dawn." Clara drank and ate a bit of the jerky Silas had given them, forcing her body to accept fuel it didn't want. When Elias helped her back into the saddle, she didn't protest the way he kept his arm around her waist, holding her secure against his chest. "Lean on me," he said quietly. "Try to rest. I'll keep us on the trail." Clara let herself relax against him, her head dropping to rest against his shoulder. She could feel his heartbeat against her back, steady and strong. And she focused on that rhythm as the horse carried them deeper into the mountains. The moonlight turned everything dreamlike and strange, but Elias's presence was solid and real, and she found herself trusting him in a way she'd never trusted anyone except her father. Somewhere in the early morning hours, exhaustion finally won. Clara's eyes drifted closed, and she slept, her body supported by Elias's strength, his arms keeping her safe as they rode through the silver night toward whatever future waited in Haven Creek. Clara woke to the sound of rushing water and realized the horse had stopped moving. Gray dawn light filtered through pine branches overhead, and she was still tucked against Elias's chest, his arm firm around her waist. For a disoriented moment, she couldn't remember where they were or why every muscle in her body screamed with pain. "Easy," Elias said quietly, his voice rough with exhaustion. "We made it. That's Devil's Gap ahead." Clara straightened slowly, her neck protesting the movement. Before them, the trail narrowed dramatically, squeezing between two towering rock walls that rose like cathedral spires into the morning mist. Water cascaded down the left wall in a thin silver ribbon, pooling at the bottom before continuing as the creek they'd been following all night. "We have to go through there?" Her voice came out hoarse. "Only way to Haven Creek from here. Unless you want to backtrack 3 days." Elias dismounted and reached up to help her down. Her legs buckled the moment her feet touched ground, and he caught her, holding her upright until her knees decided to cooperate. "Take a minute. Drink some water. This next part's going to be rough." Rough was an understatement. The gap was barely wide enough for the horse, and in places they had to lead the animal carefully over loose rock, while water from the falls made everything slick and treacherous. Clara's shoulder throbbed with each step, and twice she slipped and would have fallen if not for Elias's quick reflexes. By the time they emerged on the far side, the sun was fully up, and Clara was shaking with exhaustion. "There," Elias pointed to a flat spot beneath an overhang. "We'll rest here a few hours. You look ready to collapse." "I'm fine," Clara insisted, even as her vision swam. "You're not fine. You're dead on your feet and your bandage is soaked through. Sit down before you fall down." She sat, more heavily than she'd intended, and watched through half-closed eyes as Elias tended to the horse and then came to check her shoulder. His fingers were gentle as he unwrapped the blood-soaked bandage, but she still had to bite back a cry when he exposed the wound. "It reopened during the climb," he said, his jaw tight. "Damn it. I should have made you stay on the horse. Then we'd still be in the gap." Clara tried to see the wound, but he blocked her view. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough. Needs fresh stitches. Some of the old ones tore." He reached for his saddlebag and pulled out the small medical kit he'd been carrying. "This is going to hurt." "Everything already hurts. What's a little more?" But her attempt at bravado fell flat when she saw him thread the needle. Elias settled beside her, his movements sure despite the weariness in his face. "Look at me. Not the needle." Clara forced herself to meet his eyes. They were bloodshot from lack of sleep but steady as stone. "Tell me something," she said. "Anything. Just talk to me." "What do you want to know?" "Why did you stop being a marshal?" His hands paused for just a moment, then continued working. The first prick of the needle made Clara gasp, but she kept her eyes on his face. "I stopped believing in what I was doing. Spent too many years watching rich men buy justice, while poor men hanged for stealing bread. The law isn't blind. It just looks away from whoever has enough money to make it worth the trouble. That's why you're helping me. Because the law won't. That's part of it." Another stitch. Clara's nails dug into her palm, but she didn't look away from his face. "But mostly I'm helping you because it's the right thing to do. Sometimes that has to be enough." "You're a good man, Elias Grant." "Don't be so sure about that." But something flickered in his eyes that might have been gratitude. "Almost done. Just 2 more." The last 2 stitches were agony, but Clara made herself breathe through it, focusing on Elias's face and the steady competence of his hands. When he finally tied off the thread and reached for fresh bandages, she let out a shaky breath. "There. That should hold if you're careful." He wrapped the wound with clean cloth, his touch impersonal and efficient. "Try to sleep. We'll move again this afternoon." "What about you? When do you sleep?" "I'm fine." "Liar." Clara caught his wrist before he could move away. "You've been awake for 2 days straight. You need rest as much as I do. Someone needs to keep watch. And someone will, in shifts. You sleep first. I'll wake you if anything moves." When he started to protest, she cut him off. "Don't argue with me. I'm injured, not helpless. I can sit here and keep my eyes open for a few hours." Elias studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. But you wake me at the first sign of anything wrong. I don't care if it's just a squirrel that looks at you funny. I promise." He settled with his back against the rock wall, his rifle across his lap, and was asleep within minutes. Clara watched his face relax in sleep, the harsh lines around his mouth softening, and felt something shift in her chest. This man who owed her nothing had risked everything to keep her alive, had ridden through the night holding her safe against him, had sat up tending her fever and stitching her wounds with hands that were meant for guns but proved capable of such gentleness. The morning passed quietly. Clara kept watch as promised, her hand on the rifle Elias had taught her to use, though she saw nothing more threatening than a few deer picking their way down to the creek for water. When the sun reached its zenith and Elias still hadn't stirred, she let him sleep on. He'd earned the rest 10 times over. It was early afternoon when his eyes finally opened, instantly alert the way soldiers learn to wake. He looked at Clara, then at the sun's position, and his expression darkened. "You were supposed to wake me hours ago. You needed the sleep more than we needed to move." Clara kept her voice calm. "Nothing happened. No one came. We're fine." "That's not the point. The point is you're human, not a machine. Even you have limits, Elias." She stood carefully, testing her shoulder. The fresh stitches pulled but held. "How far to Haven Creek from here?" He stood too, checking his rifle before answering. 4 hours if we push. Maybe 5. Trail's easier from here on out. We're through the worst of it. He moved to saddle the horse, his movement still carrying an edge of frustration. "But if you ever pull something like that again—" "You'll what? Leave me in the mountains?" Clara couldn't help the small smile that tugged at her lips. "We both know you won't." His hand stilled on the saddle cinch. When he turned to look at her, his expression had shifted into something she couldn't quite read. "No, I won't. But that doesn't mean you should test me." Noted. Clara moved to stand beside the horse, wincing as her sore muscles protested. "Help me up?" They rode through the afternoon in companionable silence, the trail descending gradually through pine forest that gradually gave way to aspen groves. The air grew warmer as they lost elevation, and Clara caught herself relaxing for the first time in days. Maybe they really would make it. Maybe Haven Creek was just a few more hours ahead, and she could finally stop running. The first shot shattered the peace like breaking glass. The bullet cracked past Clara's ear close enough that she felt the wind of its passage. Elias's reaction was instantaneous. He yanked the horse sideways off the trail and drove them into the cover of a dense stand of young pines. A second shot hit a tree trunk where they'd been a heartbeat before, spraying bark. "Down!" Elias hauled Clara from the saddle and pushed her behind a boulder, covering her body with his as 2 more shots rang out. The horse, well-trained and battle-wise, had already bolted deeper into the trees. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. "How many?" "At least 3. Maybe more." Elias's rifle was already in his hands, his eyes scanning the slope above them where the shots had originated. "They're spread out, trying to pin us down." "It's Voss's men." "Had to be. No one else would be watching these trails." He fired once, the report deafening. Someone cursed from up the slope. "Got one. That'll make them think twice." "What do we do?" "We don't do anything. You stay behind this rock and don't move. I'm going to circle around and come at them from the side." He was already shifting position, preparing to move. Clara grabbed his arm. "No, it's too dangerous. They'll shoot you the second you break cover." "They'll shoot both of us if we stay here. This position's no good. They've got the high ground and all the time in the world." His gray eyes met hers, steady despite the bullets still chewing up the trees around them. "Trust me, I've done this before." "During the war?" "During everything." He pressed his rifle into her hands. "You know how to use this. Anyone comes at you from the front, you shoot. Don't hesitate. Don't warn them. Just shoot. Understand?" Clara nodded, her mouth too dry for words. Elias pulled his revolver and checked the cylinder, then looked at her one more time. "Stay down. Stay alive. I'll be back for you." Then he was gone, moving through the trees like smoke, silent as death. Clara pressed herself against the boulder and tried to keep her breathing steady. Above her, the men were shouting to each other, coordinating their attack. She recognized one voice, Wade Tucker, a hand from the Circle Vive who'd always looked at her like she was a piece of meat when he came to town. Her grip tightened on the rifle. More shots echoed through the forest, but these came from a different direction. Elias had reached his position and was engaging them. Clara heard Tucker shouting orders, heard return fire, heard someone scream. Then silence fell so suddenly it was worse than the gunfire. Minutes crawled past like hours. Clara's shoulder throbbed and her hands shook on the rifle. Where was Elias? Had they shot him? Was he lying somewhere in the forest bleeding while she hid behind a rock? Movement to her left. Clara swung the rifle around, finger on the trigger, heart in her throat. A man emerged from the trees. Not Elias. Circle Vive hand she didn't know, young and scared looking, but with his gun raised and aimed in her direction. "Don't move," he said, his voice cracking. "Boss said to bring you in alive, but he didn't say what condition, so don't make me—" Clara shot him. The rifle kicked against her shoulder and pain exploded through the wound, but her aim was true. The man went down hard, clutching his leg and screaming. Clara worked the bolt action, chambering another round, her whole body shaking now. "Drop it." Tucker's voice came from behind her. She'd been so focused on the first man she hadn't heard the second approach. "Do it now, or I'll put a bullet in your spine." Clara let the rifle fall. Slowly, she turned to face Tucker, who stood 15 feet away with his pistol pointed at her chest. His face was flushed with exertion and anger, and she could see the dark stain on his left arm where someone, Elias, had wounded him. "Been looking for you for 3 days," Tucker said. "Mr. Voss is real interested in having a conversation with you about what happened at your ranch." "I know what happened at my ranch. Your friends murdered my father and burned our home." "That's business, sweetheart. Nothing personal." He gestured with the gun. "Now you're going to come with me nice and quiet, and maybe you'll live through this. Maybe Voss will even let you keep working at the Circle 5. He always did like pretty things." The casual cruelty in his voice made Clara's stomach turn. "I'd rather die." "That can be arranged too." Tucker took a step closer. "But first I'm going to—" The gunshot came from nowhere and everywhere at once. Tucker's head snapped back and he dropped like a puppet with cut strings. Clara stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened, until Elias emerged from the trees with his smoking revolver in hand. "You all right?" His voice was calm, but his eyes were wild as they scanned her for injury. Yes. I shot one of them, in the leg." "Good." Elias moved past her to check Tucker's body, then crossed to where the man Clara had shot was trying to drag himself away. "Stay put," he told the wounded man. "You're not going anywhere." "You killed Wade," the man gasped. "Voss is going to hang you for this." "Voss can try." Elias crouched beside him, his face hard. "How many more of you are there?" "Go to hell." Elias pressed on the leg wound. The man screamed. "How many?" "3. There were 5 of us total. The other 2 ran when you started shooting from the trees." "Where's your camp?" 2 miles north, near the old trading post." The man was crying now, snot and tears mixing on his face. "Please, I need a doctor. I'm bleeding bad." "You'll live, unlike the girl you and your friends were planning to murder." Elias stood and pulled rope from his belt. He worked quickly, binding the man's hands and feet despite his protests. "If you're smart, you'll stay quiet. If you're not, I'll gag you, and the animals can have you." "You can't just leave me here." "Watch me." Elias returned to Clara and gently took the rifle from her trembling hands. "Come on, we need to move before those other 2 grow a spine and come back." Clara let him guide her away from the scene of violence, her legs moving on autopilot. Behind them, the wounded man kept shouting threats and pleas until distance swallowed the sound. Elias found his horse easily. The animal had stopped just 100 yards into the forest, and helped Clara mount before swinging up behind her. They rode hard for an hour, taking no chances, until Elias finally slowed the pace. Clara had been silent the entire time, her mind replaying the moment she'd pulled the trigger, the way the man had fallen, the blood. "I shot him," she said suddenly. "I actually shot a man." "You defended yourself. There's a difference." "Is there?" "He's lying back there bleeding because of me." "He's lying back there bleeding because he chose to work for Randall Voss and hunt down a woman who'd already lost everything." Elias's voice was firm. "You didn't start this, Clara. You're just trying to survive it. Don't let them make you feel guilty for that." "Did you kill Tucker?" "Yes." "Will there be trouble? Legal trouble?" "Not for shooting a man who is about to murder someone. Self-defense is still legal in Wyoming territory, even if everything else is bought and paid for." He paused. "But this changes things. Voss knows you're alive now, knows you're heading to Haven Creek. He'll send more men, better men. We need to get you somewhere safe and figure out our next move." Clara was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "When this is over, if we survive it, I don't know how I'll ever repay you. Don't want repayment, just want to see you safe." They rode on as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. The forest gradually thinned and the trail widened, showing signs of regular use. They passed a few homesteads, small cabins with smoke rising from chimneys, children playing in yards who stopped to stare as they rode by. Normal life, continuing on despite the violence in the mountains behind them. It was nearly sunset when they finally crested a rise and saw Haven Creek spread out in the valley below. The settlement was larger than Clara had expected. Maybe 50 buildings clustered around a main street, with more scattered up the surrounding slopes. Smoke rose from what looked like a mill at the north end of town, and she could see people moving about their evening business, lighting lamps against the coming darkness. "There," Elias said, pointing to a large 2-story building near the center of town. "That's your aunt's boarding house, the Raymond House. See the sign?" Clara could just make out the painted letters on the building's front. "I see it. How long since you've seen your aunt?" 2 years. She came to visit after her husband died. Wanted me to come back with her, said a young woman shouldn't be alone on a ranch with just her father. Clara's voice caught. "I told her we were fine, that we didn't need help." "She'll be glad to see you anyway." "Will she? I'm bringing nothing but trouble to her door." "You're bringing yourself, that's enough." Elias urged the horse down the slope toward town. "Come on, let's get you to safety." They drew stairs as they rode down Haven Creek's main street. A tall, weathered man in trail-worn clothes and a young woman in a blood-stained dress, both looking like they'd ridden through hell itself. Clara kept her head up despite the eyes on them, despite the whispers that followed in their wake. Let them look. Let them wonder. She'd survived worse than gossip. The Raymond house was a solid structure of whitewashed clapboard with a wide front porch and windows that glowed warm with lamplight. Elias helped Clara down from the horse, and she had to catch herself against his arm when her legs protested. The long ride had taken its toll. Every muscle ached, her shoulder was on fire, and exhaustion pulled at her like an undertow. "I've got you," Elias said quietly, his arm going around her waist to steady her. "Let's get you inside." They climbed the porch steps together, Clara leaning more heavily on Elias than she wanted to admit. Before they could knock, the front door flew open and a woman stood silhouetted against the lamplight. Tall and substantial, with graying hair pulled into a severe bun and eyes that went wide with shock. "Clara Reynolds, is that you?" "Hello, Aunt Ida." Clara tried to smile, but her face felt frozen. "I'm sorry to arrive unannounced, but we—" The word stuck in her throat. Where did she even begin? Ida crossed the porch in 3 quick strides and pulled Clara into her arms, careful of her injured shoulder. "My God, child, what happened to you? You're hurt. And your dress, is that blood?" She pulled back to look Clara in the face, then turned sharp eyes on Elias. "Who are you, and what have you done to my niece?" "Aunt Ida, no, he saved me. This is Elias Grant. Clara swayed on her feet and Elias's arm tightened around her. "Explanations can wait," he said. She needs a doctor and rest. In that order. Ida's expression shifted from suspicion to action in a heartbeat. "Inside, both of you. Clara, can you walk?" "I can manage." "Then manage this way. Second door on the left. That's the guest room closest to the stairs. Elias, was it? Get her settled while I fetch Doc Morrison. He lives 3 houses down." Ida was already moving, grabbing a shawl from a hook by the door. "Don't let her fall asleep until the doctor sees her. Head wounds can be tricky." "I don't have a head wound," Clara protested weakly, but Ida was already out the door and moving down the street at a pace that belied her age. Elias helped Clara through the boarding house's tidy parlor and down a short hallway to a small but immaculate room. A brass bed with a white coverlet dominated the space, flanked by a washstand and a chest of drawers. It was the most civilized place Clara had seen in 3 days, and the sight of it nearly made her cry. "Easy now." Elias guided her to sit on the edge of the bed. "Let me check that shoulder before the doctor gets here." He unwrapped the bandage with gentle efficiency, his face impassive even when fresh blood welled from where the stitches had torn during their desperate ride. The stitches didn't hold. All that bouncing around and then shooting that rifle, you've made a mess of it. "Will I live?" "Unfortunately for me, yes. You're too stubborn to die." But his tone was fond rather than critical. "Let me clean this up best I can. The doctor will do a better job, but I can at least stop the worst of the bleeding." Clara watched him work, noting the dark circles under his eyes, the lines of exhaustion in his face, the way his hands still stayed steady despite days without real rest. You should sit down. You look ready to collapse. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're up. The door burst open and Ida swept back in with a gray-haired man carrying a black leather bag. Dr. Morrison, this is my niece Clara. She's been shot. The doctor moved to the bed with professional calm, nudging Elias aside. How long ago? 3 days, Elias answered. Bullet went clean through the shoulder. I stitched it up, but she's torn some of them loose. Morrison examined the wound with practiced hands, asking questions about fever and bleeding while he worked. Clara answered mechanically, too tired to care about propriety or modesty, as the doctor cut away what remained of her blood-soaked dress to get better access to the injury. You did good work, Morrison told Elias. For a field job, anyway. Lucky she didn't lose the arm to infection. He reached into his bag for supplies. This is going to need fresh stitches and a proper dressing. Miss Reynolds, I'm going to give you something for the pain first. No, Clara shook her head firmly. No laudanum. I need to stay alert. Clara, Ida started. No, please. Just do what you need to do. I can handle it. Morrison and Ida exchanged a look. Then the doctor nodded. All right, but this is going to hurt. Ida, hold her hand. What's your name? Elias Grant. You stay too. Talk to her. Keep her focused on something besides what I'm doing. So Elias settled on Clara's other side and started talking. About nothing in particular at first, just observations about the town and the boarding house and the quality of the furniture. When Morrison began cleaning the wound and Clara's grip on Ida's hand turned white-knuckled, Elias switched to telling a story about his time in the cavalry, something involving a stolen pig and a very angry sergeant that would have been funny if Clara's shoulder wasn't being cut open and re-stitched. She focused on his voice, using it as an anchor against the pain, focused on the gray of his eyes and the rough timbre of his words, and the way he never once looked away even when her vision grayed at the edges and she had to bite her lip bloody to keep from screaming. Almost done, Morrison said. Last few stitches. You're doing fine, Miss Reynolds. When he finally tied off the thread and reached for bandages, Clara let out a shaky breath. Tears streaked her face, but she hadn't made a sound beyond a few gasps. Morrison wrapped the wound carefully, his movements sure and gentle. There. That should hold if you're careful. No lifting anything heavy, no sudden movements, no riding horses for at least a week. He looked pointedly at Elias. And no more adventures that involve being shot at. Can't make promises on that last one, Elias said. But I'll do my best. Morrison packed his bag and stood. I'll check on you tomorrow, Miss Reynolds. Get some rest. Mrs. Raymond, a word? Ida followed him out into the hall, leaving Clara and Elias alone. The silence stretched between them, suddenly awkward now that the crisis had passed. Thank you, Clara said softly. For everything. For staying. Nowhere else I need to be. Elias stood and moved toward the door. I should go. Let you rest. Where will you go? Find a hotel. Or camp outside town. Doesn't matter. Elias. Clara caught his hand before he could leave. Stay, please. There are rooms here. Aunt Ida runs a boarding house. You can't just ride off into the night after everything that's happened. He looked down at their joined hands, then at her face. Something shifted in his expression, something vulnerable and uncertain that she'd never seen before. Clara, I'm not asking you to stay forever, just for tonight, just until I know you're safe, too. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I don't want to wake up alone in a strange room and wonder if you're lying dead somewhere because of me. The silence stretched long enough that Clara thought he'd refuse. Then Elias nodded slowly. All right, for tonight. Ida returned alone, her expression unreadable. The doctor's gone. Says you'll live, but you need proper rest and care. She turned to Elias. You look like death yourself, young man. When's the last time you slept? Yesterday, or the day before. I've lost track. Then you'll stay here tonight. I have rooms available and you've clearly been looking after my niece. Ida's voice softened slightly. I don't know what happened out there, but I can see you kept her alive. That earns you a bed and a hot meal. Come on, both of you. Kitchen's warm and I've got stew on. You can tell me everything while you eat." Over bowls of rich beef stew and fresh bread, Clara and Elias took turns explaining what had happened. The attack on the ranch, Thomas Reynolds' murder, Clara's flight through the darkness, their journey through the mountains. Ida listened in silence, her face growing harder with each detail, until Clara finished with the ambush that afternoon. "Randall Voss," Ida said, and the name came out like a curse. "That man is a cancer on this territory, and now he's murdered my brother-in-law and tried to kill my niece." She stood abruptly and moved to the stove, pouring coffee with shaking hands. "What do you plan to do, Clara? You can't just let him get away with this." "I won't. I'm going to testify against him. Tell everyone what happened. Make sure he pays for what he did." "Testifying won't do any good if there's no one honest left to hear it," Elias said quietly. "Voss owns too many people, judges, lawmen, politicians. Your word against his, he'll make you out to be a liar or crazy with grief. Then what do I do? Just hide here and let him win? You get proof, evidence, something that can't be bought or dismissed." Elias met her eyes across the table. "And you make allies, people who'll stand with you when the time comes. This isn't a fight you can win alone, Clara." "She won't have to." Ida set the coffee pot down with a thud. "I'll stand with her. This is my family, my blood. Voss want to fight. He'll get one." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Aunt Ida, no arguments. You're staying here where I can look after you properly. And Mr. Grant, Elias, you're welcome to stay as long as you're helping Clara. Lord knows she'll need someone who knows how to handle themselves when Voss comes calling. Because he will come calling. That's the one thing I'm certain of." Elias was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "I'll stay. At least until Clara's healed enough to defend herself properly." He stood and carried his empty bowl to the sink. "But we should all understand something. The men I shot today, Voss will use that. He'll paint me as a killer and Clara as my accomplice. This is going to get uglier before it gets better." "Let it," Clara said, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "I'm not running anymore. My father didn't raise me to back down from bullies, and I won't start now." Ida smiled, the first genuine smile since they'd arrived. "There's the Reynolds blood showing through. Your father would be proud." Later, after Ida had shown Elias to a room down the hall and Clara had changed into a nightgown Ida provided, Clara lay in the darkness staring at the ceiling. Through the thin walls, she could hear the sounds of the boarding house settling for the night. Footsteps overhead, distant voices, the creak of floorboards. She should sleep. Her body desperately needed it. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw her father's face, heard the gunshots, felt the bullet tear through her shoulder, saw Tucker falling, the man she'd shot screaming, blood on the mountain trail. A soft knock on her door made her jump. "Come in," she called, sitting up carefully. Elias stood in the doorway, fully dressed despite the late hour. "Saw your light still on. Thought you might need something." "Can't sleep. Every time I try, I just—" She couldn't finish the sentence. He understood anyway. He always seemed to understand. "It'll get easier. Not quickly, but it will. The first time is always the hardest." "How many times have you shot someone?" "Enough that I stopped counting." He moved into the room but stayed near the door, respecting the boundaries of propriety even now. "War, being a marshal, working cattle drives through hostile territory. Sometimes you don't have a choice. Sometimes it's you or them." "Does it get easier? The guilt?" "No, but you learn to carry it better." His eyes were sad in the lamplight. "And you learn to remember that you're alive because you fought back. That matters." Clara nodded slowly. "Will you stay? Just for a few minutes, until I fall asleep. I know it's improper, but I'll stay." He settled into the chair by the window, close enough that she could see him but far enough to preserve decency. Clara lay back down and pulled the covers up to her chin, suddenly aware of how young she must look, how vulnerable in her borrowed nightgown with her hair loose around her shoulders. "Tell me something," she said quietly. "Something true." "Like what?" "I don't know, anything. I just want to hear your voice." Elias was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "My sister's name was Rachel. She was 15 when she died. Wanted to be a teacher. She used to make me practice reading with her. Said I needed to learn more than just how to shoot and ride. After she died, I joined the cavalry because I didn't know what else to do with all that anger. Spent 3 years fighting and killing and coming home empty. The marshal job was supposed to give me purpose, make her death mean something. Didn't work out that way. Clara's throat tightened. I'm sorry. Me too. But meeting you, helping you, maybe that's what Rachel wanted me to find. A way to make a difference for someone who still has a future ahead of them. He shifted in the chair. So stop apologizing for needing help, Clara. You're giving me something I lost a long time ago. You're giving me a reason to keep trying. She wanted to say something meaningful, something that would convey what his presence meant to her. But exhaustion was finally winning and the words wouldn't come. Her eyes drifted closed, and the last thing she saw was Elias silhouetted against the window, keeping watch, as he had every night since he'd found her bleeding in the grass. When Clara woke in the morning to sunlight streaming through the window, Elias was gone. But folded on the chair where he'd sat was her mother's Bible, and a note in rough handwriting. Stayed until dawn. Gone to scout the town and see what news is spreading about yesterday. Stay inside until I return. E. Clara held the note against her chest and let herself feel, for the first time since her father died, something that might have been hope. Clara spent the morning in restless anxiety, pacing the small room until Ida finally marched in and ordered her to sit down before she tore her stitches open again. The blue dress Silas had given them lay across the chair, and Ida had insisted on washing and mending it, her needle flying through the fabric with practiced efficiency while Clara watched from the bed. Your mother taught me to sew, Ida said without looking up from her work. Did you know that? When I married your uncle and came west, I didn't know a whip stitch from a back stitch. Sarah sat with me every evening for a month until I could make a hem that wouldn't shame me in church. Clara hadn't known. There was so much about her mother she'd never learned, all those stories lost when Sarah Reynolds had died of pneumonia during Clara's 8th winter. Tell me about her, please. Father never liked to talk about her, said it hurt too much. Ida's hand stilled on the dress. Your mother was sunshine wrapped in human form. She could walk into a room and everyone would smile, even if they'd been miserable a moment before. She had this laugh, like bells, your father always said. And she loved him with everything in her, married him against her family's wishes because they said a soldier with nothing but ambition was no fit match for a merchant's daughter. She smiled at the memory. She never regretted it for a single day. Even when times were hard and money was scarce, she'd say she'd rather be poor with Thomas Reynolds than rich with anyone else. Tears slipped down Clara's cheeks. I miss her. Even after all these years, I still miss her. Of course you do, and now you're missing your father too. Ida set the dress aside and came to sit on the edge of the bed, taking Clara's hand in both of hers. I won't lie to you, child. This grief you're carrying, it's going to be heavy for a long time, but you're strong like they were. You'll carry it, and you'll survive, and eventually you'll find a way to live with it. I don't feel strong. I feel terrified. Strong people usually do. Cowards are the ones who think they're brave. Ida squeezed her hand. And that young man you rode in with, Elias, he seems to think you're worth fighting for. That counts for something. Heat rose in Clara's face. It's not like that. He's just helping me because it's the right thing to do. Ida's tone suggested she didn't believe that for a second. Well, whatever his reasons, I'm grateful for them. Not many men would ride through hell to protect a stranger. The front door opened downstairs and both women tensed. Heavy footsteps crossed the parlor, then Elias's voice called up, It's just me! Clara was on her feet before Ida could stop her, hurrying to the top of the stairs despite the pull of her stitches. Elias stood in the front hall, his hat in his hands, his face grim. Behind him was another man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a marshal's star on his vest. Clara, this is Marshal Henry Webb, Elias said. He needs to talk to you. Clara's stomach dropped. Had Voss already bought the law in Haven Creek? Was she about to be arrested for defending herself? She descended the stairs slowly, keeping her good hand on the railing, and met the marshal's steady gaze. Webb was perhaps 50, with silver threading through his dark hair and eyes that had seen their share of trouble. He studied Clara for a long moment before speaking. Miss Reynolds, I'm sorry for your loss. Your father was known to me by reputation, an honest man in a territory that doesn't breed many of them. Thank you, Marshal. Clara kept her voice steady. Did Elias tell you what happened? He did. Told me about the attack on your ranch, the men who ambushed you in the mountains, everything. Webb's expression remained neutral. I need to hear it from you too, in your own words. And I need the truth, no matter how ugly it is. So Clara told it all again, every detail from the moment Voss's men had ridden up to her father's door to yesterday's gunfight in the forest. Webb listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes in a small leather book. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. That's a serious accusation you're making against Randall Voss. He's a powerful man with a lot of friends in high places. I know what I saw. I know who killed my father. Can you prove it was Voss who gave the order, or just that his men did the actual killing? Clara's hands clenched. What difference does it make? Those men work for him. They follow his orders. It makes a legal difference. Without proof that Voss ordered the attack, a good lawyer will argue his men acted on their own. Voss walks free, and maybe a few hired hands swing for murder. Webb tucked his notebook away. I'm not saying I don't believe you, Miss Reynolds. I'm saying we need more than your word if we want to see justice done properly. Then what do I do? Clara heard the desperation in her own voice and hated it. Just let him get away with it? You stay here, stay safe, and let me do my job. Webb's voice softened slightly. I've been marshal in Haven Creek for 12 years. I know Voss's reputation and I know how he operates. Give me time to investigate properly, to gather evidence and statements from people who might be willing to talk now that you've survived to tell your story. And if Voss sends more men after her? Elias asked, his tone carefully neutral. Then you do what you did yesterday. Keep her alive until I can put him in handcuffs. Webb turned to face Elias fully. You're former law yourself, Grant. You know how this works. We go off half-cocked with nothing but witness testimony, and Voss's lawyers will tear it apart. We need documents. We need proof of premeditation. We need someone from inside the Circle Vive willing to testify about orders being given. You're asking us to wait while Voss plans his next attack. I'm asking you to be smart. Miss Reynolds is alive against considerable odds. Let's keep her that way while I build a case that will actually stick. Webb settled his hat back on his head. I'll be in touch within a few days. In the meantime, stay here. Don't go anywhere alone, and don't do anything that might give Voss an excuse to claim self-defense when his men come calling again. After Webb left, Clara sank into a chair in the parlor, exhaustion and frustration warring inside her. Elias moved to the window, watching the street with the same alertness he'd shown in the mountains. Do you trust him? Clara asked. The marshal? I don't trust anyone except the people in this room. Elias turned to face her. But Webb has a reputation as one of the few honest lawmen left in Wyoming territory. If anyone can build a case against Voss, it's him. And if he can't, then we find another way. His voice carried absolute certainty. One way or another, Clara, your father will have justice. I promise you that. The days that followed fell into an uneasy routine. Clara healed slowly, spending her time helping Ida around the boarding house when her shoulder allowed it. Elias took on odd jobs around town, repairing fences, chopping wood, anything that kept him close enough to watch over her while earning his keep. They ate meals together at Ida's table and talked about anything except the threat hanging over them. It was 3 days after their arrival when everything changed. Clara was helping Ida prepare dinner when a knock came at the front door. Elias appeared from the parlor where he'd been oiling his guns, his hand already on his revolver. Stay back, he said quietly to Clara, then moved to answer the door. The man standing on the porch was a stranger, well-dressed in a suit too fine for Haven Creek, with slicked back hair and a smile that never reached his eyes. Good evening. I'm looking for Miss Clara Reynolds. Who's asking? My name is Gerald Finch. I'm an attorney representing the interests of Mr. Randall Voss. He pulled an envelope from his jacket. I have a business proposition for Miss Reynolds. May I speak with her? Every instinct Clara had screamed danger, but she stepped forward anyway. I'm Clara Reynolds. Finch's smile widened. Miss Reynolds, first allow me to express Mr. Voss's deepest condolences for the tragic loss of your father. Such a terrible accident. It wasn't an accident. It was murder. Now, let's not be hasty with accusations that could be considered slanderous. Finch's voice remained pleasant, but his eyes went cold. The fact is, your father's ranch has burned and the property stands vacant. Mr. Voss has authorized me to make you a generous offer, $5,000 for the land and water rights. That's well above market value, given the condition of the property. Clara felt Elias tense beside her. I'm not selling. Miss Reynolds, please be reasonable. You're a young woman alone in the world now. $5,000 is enough to start a new life somewhere far from all this unpleasantness. You could go east, maybe. Find a husband, settle down properly. He held out the envelope. All you need to do is sign the deed over to Mr. Voss and the money is yours. Clean, simple, legal. I said no. Finch's pleasant expression cracked slightly. Mr. Voss is trying to be generous here. He's offering you a way out, Miss Reynolds. It would be unfortunate if you refused his kindness and found yourself in even more difficult circumstances. Is that a threat? Elias's voice was soft and deadly. Merely an observation. These mountains can be dangerous for young women traveling alone. Accidents happen. People disappear. Finch tucked the envelope back into his jacket. You have 48 hours to reconsider, Miss Reynolds. After that, Mr. Voss's offer expires and you'll have to deal with whatever comes next on your own. He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Clara and Elias staring after him. Ida appeared from the kitchen, her face white. That was a threat, plain as day. Yes. Clara's voice shook, but her spine was straight. He's giving me 2 days to sell or face consequences. We need to tell Marshal Webb, Ida said. Won't do any good. Elias closed the door and checked the locks. Finch was careful with his words. Nothing he said could be proved as a direct threat in court. He's a lawyer. He knows exactly how far he can push without crossing the line. Then what do? We wait, but we don't wait quietly. Elias turned to Clara, his expression grim. It's time to stop being defensive and start pushing back. Webb wants evidence? Let's get him evidence. Someone in Voss's organization has to have proof of what he ordered. Bills of sale, correspondence, something in writing that ties him directly to the attack on your ranch. How do we get something like that? We don't. But I know someone who might be able to help. Elias moved to grab his coat. There's a man in Buffalo, used to work for Voss as a bookkeeper before Voss fired him for asking too many questions about the Circle V's finances. If anyone knows where the bodies are buried, it's him. Buffalo is 2 days' ride from here, Ida said, and probably crawling with Voss's men. Which is why I'll go alone and fast. Stay off the main trails, be back within 4 days. He looked at Clara. You stay here with your aunt. Keep your head down and don't do anything foolish while I'm gone. Elias, no. It's too dangerous. If Voss's men catch you, they won't. I've been avoiding people who want me dead since I was 16. I know how to move through hostile territory. He settled his hat on his head. This is the best chance we have, Clara. Let me do this. Let us help. Marshal Webb's voice came from the doorway. He stood on the porch with 2 deputies flanking him. I heard Finch paid you a visit. Followed him here to make sure he didn't try anything stupid. Now I'm hearing you're planning to ride to Buffalo to dig up dirt on Voss? Elias's hand moved toward his gun, then stopped. How long were you listening? Long enough. And you're right about the bookkeeper, man named Samuel Price. I've wanted to talk to him for years but never had enough cause to make the trip official. Webb stepped inside uninvited. But if I had reason to believe Price had information about a murder and land theft, that would be different. That would be official business. You want to come with me? Elias sounded skeptical. I want to deputize you and send you with proper legal authority. You find Price, you get him to talk, and anything he says becomes official testimony I can use against Voss. Webb pulled a badge from his pocket. What do you say, Grant? Feel like being a lawman again? Elias stared at the badge for a long moment. Clara held her breath, watching emotions war across his face. Doubt, anger, something that might have been longing. Finally, he reached out and took the badge. All right. But I work my way. No interference. Agreed. Just bring me something I can use in court. Webb turned to Clara. Miss Reynolds, while he's gone, you stay here. My deputies will check on you twice a day. If Voss or any of his people come around, you send for me immediately. Understood? Clara nodded, her throat too tight for words. Webb and his deputies left, and suddenly it was just her and Elias and Ida in the parlor. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting everything gold. "When do you leave?" Clara asked quietly. "First light tomorrow. I'll need tonight to prepare and rest." Elias looked at her, his gray eyes serious. "Clara, if something goes wrong—" "Nothing will go wrong." "But if it does, you need to promise me you'll listen to Webb. Do what he says, stay safe, don't try to go after Voss yourself." "I promise." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but she said it anyway because she could see he needed to hear it. That evening, after supper, Clara found herself unable to settle. She tried to read, but the words swam on the page. Tried to help Ida with mending, but her hands shook too badly to thread a needle. Finally, she gave up and went to sit on the front porch in the gathering darkness, her mother's Bible in her lap. She didn't hear Elias approach until he was settling into the chair beside her. "Couldn't sleep either?" "Didn't try. What about you? You need to rest before tomorrow." "I'll rest on the trail." He was quiet for a moment, looking out at the darkened street. "I keep thinking about what you said that first night, about your father singing while he cooked. He had a terrible voice, but he loved it anyway. Used to sing this old cavalry song, something about riding to glory and beautiful girls waiting back home. I never knew if he made up the words or if it was a real song." "It's real. We sang it in my unit." Elias's voice went distant. "Funny the things you remember, the songs, the smell of coffee on a cold morning, the way light looked through canvas tents, all the little details that meant you were still alive." Clara set the Bible aside and turned to face him. "Are you afraid? About tomorrow?" "No." "Yes. Not about riding to Buffalo or finding Price, but about—" He stopped, then started again. "I'm afraid that I'll fail you, that I'll come back empty-handed and Voss will win and your father will never get justice, because I wasn't good enough to get the proof we need. Elias, you've already done more than anyone had a right to ask. If you come back safely, that's enough." "It's not enough. It won't be enough until Voss pays for what he did." His hands clenched on the arms of the chair. "I've let too many guilty men walk free in my life. Watched too many rich bastards buy their way out of consequences while poor men hanged for stealing bread. I won't let it happen again. Not this time." The passion in his voice made Clara's chest ache. She reached out and placed her hand over his, feeling the calluses and scars that mapped a lifetime of hard living. "Then come back safe, and we'll figure out the rest together, all right?" Elias looked down at their joined hands, then up at her face. Something shifted in his expression, something vulnerable and raw that she'd never seen before. "Clara, I need to tell you something. In case something goes wrong tomorrow. Don't. Let me say this, please." He turned his hand over so their palms pressed together. "When I found you in that grass, bleeding and scared, I thought I was just doing the right thing, just helping someone in need like I'd promised myself after Rachel died. But somewhere between that first night and now, it became more than that. You became more than that." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. "Elias, I'm not asking for anything. I know the timing's wrong, and I know you're grieving, and I know I'm just a used-up former lawman with more ghosts than prospects. But I wanted you to know that keeping you safe isn't just about doing the right thing anymore. It's about—" His voice roughened. "It's about not being able to imagine a world where you're not in it." The words hung between them in the darkness, heavy with meaning Clara wasn't sure she was ready to face. But she didn't pull her hand away. Instead, she squeezed his fingers and said softly, "Then you'd better come back, because I'm not done needing you yet." Something that might have been relief crossed his face. He lifted her hand to his lips, the briefest touch, barely more than a whisper of contact, then stood. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day for both of us." He was gone before Clara could respond, disappearing back into the boarding house. She sat alone in the darkness, her hand still tingling from his kiss, her heart racing with emotion she couldn't name. Around her, the night sounds of Haven Creek continued on. Distant voices, a dog barking, the creak of settling wood. Normal life continuing despite the violence that stalked their steps. Clara slept poorly that night, her dreams full of burning ranches and gunshots and Elias riding away into darkness that swallowed him whole. When she woke to gray dawn light, she found a note slipped under her door. Gone to Buffalo. Stay safe. Remember your promise. E. The first day passed slowly. Clara helped Ida with cleaning and cooking, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind occupied. The deputies came by twice, as Webb had promised, checking the doors and windows and making sure no one suspicious was watching the house. Clara tried to be grateful for the protection, but mostly she felt trapped. The second day was worse. Clara couldn't settle to anything, pacing the house until Ida finally sent her outside to hang laundry just to get her out from underfoot. She was pinning sheets to the line when she heard horses coming up the street. Too many horses, moving too fast. Clara's hands stilled on the wet fabric. Through the sheets, she could see 6 riders approaching the Raymond house, all wearing Circle 5 brands on their saddles. Her blood went cold. The deputies weren't due for another hour, and Elias was 2 days away in Buffalo. She was on her own. The riders stopped in front of the house and dismounted. Their leader, a man Clara recognized from town, Brock Chandler, Voss's foreman. Tall and mean-looking with a scar running down his left cheek, Chandler had a reputation for violence that kept most people from crossing him. "Mrs. Raymond," he called out, his voice carrying easily, "send out the Reynolds girl. Mr. Voss wants a word." Ida appeared on the porch, her shotgun cradled in her arms. "You tell Mr. Voss that if he wants to speak to my niece, he can present himself properly at a decent hour, not send his dogs to bark at my door." Chandler's face darkened. "That's mighty bold talk for a woman alone. Where's that cowboy been playing bodyguard? Run off and left you two to fend for yourselves?" "We're not alone." Ida's voice stayed steady despite the odds. "This town has law, and Marshal Webb knows exactly who you are and why you're here. Webb's in Buffalo on business. Won't be back for days." Chandler smiled, and it was an ugly thing, which means there's nobody to help you if we decide to come inside and get what we came for. So I'll ask one more time. Send out Clara Reynolds, or we'll come in and drag her out. Clara stepped out from behind the laundry, her heart hammering but her chin high. She couldn't let Ida face this alone. "I'm right here." "What does Voss want?" "There she is, pretty as a picture despite that bullet hole in your shoulder." Chandler's eyes traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Mr. Voss sent us to escort you to the Circle 5. Says he wants to discuss your father's property face to face. Settle this business like civilized people." "I'm not going anywhere with you." "Afraid that wasn't a request, sweetheart." Chandler nodded to his men, who started moving toward the porch. "Boys, go get her." "Stop right there." The voice cracked like a whip from down the street. Marshal Webb stood at the corner with his 2 deputies, all 3 with rifles raised. "Chandler, you and your men mount up and ride out of Haven Creek. Now." "I thought you were in Buffalo, Marshal." "Did you? Funny thing about that, I changed my plans when I heard Voss's lawyer had threatened Miss Reynolds. Decided Buffalo could wait a day or 2 while I kept an eye on things here." Webb moved closer, his rifle never wavering. "Now you have about 10 seconds to get on those horses before I start arresting people for harassment and trespassing." Chandler's jaw worked like he was chewing leather. For a moment, Clara thought he'd refuse, thought violence was about to erupt right there on her aunt's front lawn. Then he spat in the dirt and gestured to his men. "This isn't over. Tell your niece she's just making things harder on herself. Voss always gets what he wants. Always." They mounted and rode out at a gallop, kicking up dust that hung in the air long after they'd disappeared. Webb approached the porch, lowering his rifle. "You two all right?" "We're fine, thanks to you." Ida's voice shook slightly now that the danger had passed. "How did you know they'd come?" "I didn't, but I know how men like Voss think. Grant leaves town. They figure Miss Reynolds is vulnerable. Perfect time to apply pressure." Webb looked at Clara. "Grant was right about one thing. You need to stop being defensive and start fighting back. I sent him to Buffalo for evidence, but we can work on building the case here too." "How?" Clara's hands were still trembling, but her mind was racing. "What can I do that won't get me killed?" "You can testify, publicly, formally." Webb's expression was grim. "I'm calling an inquest into your father's death. You'll stand before the town and tell them everything that happened. Make it public so Voss can't just make you disappear without everyone knowing he did it." "That makes her an even bigger target," Ida protested. "She's already a target. This way, at least she has protection of public knowledge. Harder to kill someone when the whole territory knows your motive. Webb settled his hat back on his head. Think about it. I'll be back tomorrow for your answer. In the meantime, my deputies will be stationed here tonight. No one's getting to you without going through them first. After Webb left, Claire and Ida retreated inside and locked every door and window. They sat in the kitchen drinking coffee neither of them wanted, listening to every sound from outside, jumping at shadows. Night fell, and the deputies took up positions on the porch and in the back garden. Clara tried to eat dinner but couldn't manage more than a few bites. "He'll come back," Ida said quietly. "Elias. He'll come back, and he'll have what we need." "You don't know that. Voss could have men watching the roads, could have already—" Clara couldn't finish the thought. "He's survived this long, hasn't he? He'll survive a little longer." Ida reached across the table and gripped Clara's hand. "You have to have faith, child. In him, in Webb, in justice itself. Because if we give up on faith, Voss has already won." Clara nodded, but sleep eluded her that night. She lay in bed listening to the house settle, to the deputies' occasional low conversations from the porch, to her own racing thoughts. Somewhere out in the darkness, Elias was riding toward Buffalo and whatever fate waited there. And here in Haven Creek, she was preparing to put herself in the crosshairs by testifying publicly against the most powerful man in the territory. Her father's face swam in her memory, his smile, his steady hands, his unshakable belief that doing right mattered more than doing easy. She thought about the man who'd held her through the darkest nights, who'd ridden into danger without hesitation to keep her safe, who'd looked at her on the porch last night like she was something precious worth fighting for. Dawn came gray and cold, bringing no news from Buffalo. Clara dressed in the blue dress Silas had given her, braided her hair with shaking hands, and came downstairs to find Marshal Webb waiting in the parlor with papers in his hand. "I need your answer," he said without preamble. "Will you testify?" Clara thought of her father, of Elias, of all the people Voss had hurt and would keep hurting if someone didn't stand up to him. She thought about the woman she'd been 2 weeks ago, sheltered, scared, uncertain of her own strength. That woman had died in the flames of her childhood home. The woman standing here now was someone different, someone harder. Someone who'd learned that sometimes the right thing and the safe thing weren't the same, and you had to choose anyway. "Yes," Clara said. "I'll testify." "When?" "Tomorrow afternoon, Town Hall. I'll have deputies posted, and I've sent word to the territorial governor's office. This will be done by the book, witnessed by everyone." Webb's expression softened slightly. "You're a brave woman, Miss Reynolds. Your father would be proud." "I hope so," Clara whispered. "I really hope so." That night she sat alone in her room, her mother's Bible open on her lap, and prayed for the first time since she was a child, prayed for Elias's safety, prayed for justice, prayed for the strength to see this through to whatever end waited. Outside her window, the stars watched in silence, offering no answers but bearing witness all the same. The morning of the inquest dawned cold and clear, frost glittering on the windows of the Raymond house like scattered diamonds. Clara woke before sunrise, her stomach churning with nerves and her shoulder aching where the stitches pulled. She dressed carefully in the blue dress, her hands trembling as she fastened the buttons. The face that stared back at her from the small mirror was pale and hollow-eyed, but her jaw was set with determination she hadn't known she possessed 2 weeks ago. Downstairs, Ida was already in the kitchen brewing coffee strong enough to strip paint. She took one look at Clara and pulled her into a fierce hug. "You don't have to do this," Ida said quietly. "We could still run, take the first stage east and never look back." "You know I can't do that." Clara pulled away and accepted the coffee cup Ida pressed into her hands. "Besides, running won't bring Father back. Won't stop Voss from doing this to someone else. This has to end here." "I know. Doesn't mean I have to like watching you put yourself in danger." Ida's voice cracked slightly. "Your mother would box my ears for letting you do this." "Mother would be standing right beside me. You know she would." Clara managed a weak smile. "She never backed down from anything either. Father used to say it was what he loved most about her." They ate breakfast in silence, neither of them tasting the food. By the time the sun crested the mountains and spilled golden light across Haven Creek, People were already gathering on the street outside the town hall. Word had spread fast. The Reynolds girl was testifying against Randall Voss. Everyone within 20 miles wanted to witness what happened next. Marshal Webb arrived at 9 o'clock sharp with 4 deputies. His face was grim as he surveyed the crowd already forming. "Bigger turnout than I expected," he said. "Could be good or bad depending on which way sentiment runs. Half these people probably owe Voss money or favors. Then they'll see what kind of man he really is." Clara straightened her spine. "Is there any word from Elias?" Webb shook his head. "Nothing yet, but Buffalo's a 2-day hard ride. Even if he left the moment he found Price, he wouldn't make it back before tomorrow at the earliest." He paused, then added more gently, "I know you were hoping he'd be here." "He told me to stay safe and trust you. I'm trying to do both." Clara pulled on her coat, wincing as the movement jarred her shoulder. "Let's get this done before I lose my nerve." The walk to the town hall felt like a march to the gallows. People lined the street, some calling encouragement, others just staring with hungry curiosity. Clara kept her eyes forward and her chin high, Ida on one side and Webb on the other like bookends. The deputies formed a loose perimeter, hands resting on their weapons, watching the crowd for trouble. The town hall was packed to standing room only. Every bench was filled and people crowded against the walls, craning for a better view. At the front of the room sat a long table where 3 men waited: Webb, the town mayor, and a territorial judge who'd ridden in from Cheyenne specifically for this hearing. Behind them hung a large American flag, its stars and stripes a reminder that this was supposed to be a country built on laws. Clara took her seat in a chair facing the table, feeling hundreds of eyes boring into her back. Somewhere in that crowd was probably someone who worked for Voss, someone who'd report every word she said. Let them. She was done hiding. The judge, a silver-haired man named Callahan with the kind face of someone who'd seen too much injustice, called the hearing to order with 3 sharp raps of his gavel. The crowd quieted. "We are here today to investigate the death of Thomas Reynolds and the destruction of his property," Callahan announced, his voice carrying clearly. "Miss Clara Reynolds has come forward with testimony regarding these events. This is an official territorial inquest, and anyone found disrupting these proceedings will be removed and charged with contempt. Are we clear?" A murmur of assent rippled through the crowd. Callahan turned his attention to Clara. "Miss Reynolds, please state your full name for the record." "Clara Marie Reynolds, daughter of Thomas and Sarah Reynolds, born in Kansas in 1857. "And you were present on the night of October 15th when your family's ranch was attacked?" "Yes, sir." Clara's voice came out stronger than she'd expected. "I was there. I saw everything." For the next hour, Clara told her story from beginning to end. She described the men who'd ridden up that night, how they'd demanded her father sign over the water rights, how he'd refused. She named Wade Tucker and the other Circle 5 hands she'd recognized. She told them about the gunshots, the flames, her father's final words as he pushed her toward safety. Her voice only broke once when describing her father's death, but she pressed on. The room was silent except for her voice and the scratch of the court recorder's pen. Even the people who probably wanted to dismiss her testimony seemed held by the raw truth in her words. "And after you escaped through the window," Judge Callahan asked gently, "what happened then?" Clara told them about collapsing in the grass, about Elias finding her and carrying her to safety. She told them about Silas Perkins and the journey through the mountains. She told them about the ambush and shooting the man who'd come at her with a gun. Through it all, she kept her eyes on the judge's face, refusing to look at the crowd and see doubt or disbelief. When she finished, silence filled the town hall like standing water. Then a voice from the back of the room shattered it. "That's a fine story, young lady. Real tearjerker. Only problem is, it's a lie." Every head turned. Randall Voss himself stood in the doorway, flanked by his lawyer Finch and half a dozen Circle 5 hands, including Brock Chandler. Voss was a big man running to fat, with a florid face and cold blue eyes that calculated the value of everything they saw. He wore an expensive suit and a smile that never reached those eyes. "Mr. Voss," Judge Callahan said sharply, "this is a closed hearing. You have no right to—" "I have every right to defend myself against slander, Your Honor. This girl is accusing me and my men of murder and arson. Those are serious charges that could destroy a man's reputation." Voss walked down the center aisle like he owned the room. Maybe he did. Clara saw several people shrink back as he passed, saw the fear in their eyes. Now I'm a reasonable man. I understand Miss Reynolds has suffered a terrible tragedy. Her father died in a fire. That's documented fact. But to claim my men started that fire? To claim I ordered it? That's pure fantasy born of grief. I know what I saw, Clara said, her voice cutting through his smooth words like a knife. Your men killed my father. Tucker admitted as much before Elias shot him. Ah, yes, the mysterious Elias Grant, a known killer and former lawman run out of New Mexico for excessive violence. Real, reliable witness there. Voss turned to address the crowd. Folks, we all know tragedy can make people see things that aren't there. Miss Reynolds is a traumatized young woman who's been taken advantage of by a violent drifter with a grudge against authority. She needs our sympathy, not our condemnation. And she certainly doesn't need to be used as a weapon against honest businessmen. The crowd was murmuring now, some nodding along with Voss's words. Clara felt panic rising in her throat. He was doing it, turning her testimony into something questionable, something that could be dismissed as hysteria or manipulation. Mr. Voss, Judge Callahan said coldly, you will address this court properly or you will be removed. Miss Reynolds' testimony stands on its own merit, and does it? Finch stepped forward, all smooth lawyer confidence. Your Honor, without corroborating evidence or witnesses, this is simply one person's word against my clients. And given that Miss Reynolds has considerable financial motive to make these accusations, specifically avoiding legal sale of property that now has no owner, I think we need to question the validity of her claims. My father's dead. Clara was on her feet now, hands clenched into fists. You murdered him for land and water, and now you're standing here lying about it like his life meant nothing. Careful, Miss Reynolds, Finch said smoothly. Continued slander could result in legal action against you personally. The threat hung in the air like poison. Clara felt tears of rage burning behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. She would not give Voss the satisfaction of seeing her break. Your Honor, Marshal Webb stood, his hand resting on his holstered gun. I'd like to call a witness who can corroborate Miss Reynolds' testimony. What witness? Finch demanded. According to Miss Reynolds herself, everyone at that ranch died except her. Not everyone who worked for Mr. Voss. Webb moved to the door and opened it. Samuel Price, please come in. The man who entered was thin and nervous-looking, with wire-rimmed spectacles and ink-stained fingers. He kept his eyes down as he walked to the front of the room, but Clara saw Voss's face go dark with rage. Price, Voss growled. What the hell do you think you're doing? Telling the truth for once in my miserable life, Price said quietly. He pulled a leather satchel from under his coat and set it on the table in front of Judge Callahan. That's 5 years of Circle 5 financial records, correspondence, and orders, including a letter dated October 10th where Mr. Voss explicitly instructs his foreman to handle the Reynolds problem permanently and make sure there's nothing left to dispute. The courtroom erupted. Voss lunged forward, but Webb and his deputies were faster, pinning the cattle baron's arms before he could reach Price. Finch was shouting about illegal search and seizure. Judge Callahan was hammering his gavel and demanding order. Through it all, Clara stood frozen, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. Where did you get those? Voss roared, struggling against the deputy's grip. Those are private documents. You had no right. I was your bookkeeper for 8 years, Price said, his voice shaking but determined. I kept copies of everything because I knew someday you'd go too far and I wanted insurance. When Marshal Webb's man came asking questions, I decided it was time to do the right thing. He looked at Clara for the first time. I'm sorry about your father, miss. He was a good man, better than most of us deserved. Judge Callahan had the satchel open and was reading through documents with increasingly grim expression. After several long minutes, he looked up at Voss. Randall Voss, based on the evidence presented here today, and the testimony of Miss Reynolds and Mr. Price, I am ordering your immediate arrest on charges of conspiracy to commit murder, arson, and land theft. You will be held without bail pending trial in Cheyenne. He turned to Webb. Marshal, take him into custody. The room exploded again. Some people cheering, others shouting in protest, still others just stunned into silence. Voss fought like a cornered animal as the deputies hauled him toward the door, his face purple with rage. This isn't over, he screamed at Clara. You hear me, girl? I have friends in high places. I'll be out in a week, and when I am, you'll regret every word you said here today. Keep threatening witnesses, Voss, Judge Callahan said coldly. It's doing wonders for your case. They dragged him out, still shouting threats. Chandler and the other Circle 5 hands melted away into the crowd, suddenly eager to be anywhere else. Finch gathered his papers with shaking hands, his smooth confidence shattered. Clara sank back into her chair, her legs refusing to hold her any longer. It was done. Actually done. Voss was arrested, the evidence was documented, justice was finally within reach. She waited for relief to come, for triumph, for anything except the hollow exhaustion that filled her chest. Miss Reynolds, Judge Callahan's voice was gentle. Are you all right? I don't know, Clara said honestly. I don't know what I am. Ida was there then, pulling Clara into her arms and letting her finally cry. Great shaking sobs that carried 2 weeks of fear and grief and rage, spilling out in the packed courtroom while people watched and whispered. Clara didn't care anymore. Let them see. Let them know what Randall Voss had cost her. When she'd cried herself empty, she pulled back and wiped her eyes. Where's Samuel Price? I need to thank him. But Price had already slipped away, disappearing into the crowd before anyone could stop him. Webb shook his head when Clara asked. Man's probably halfway to California by now. He knew testifying against Voss would make him a target for anyone still loyal to the Circle 5. Smart of him to run while he could. Will Voss really go to trial? He will. And with that evidence Price provided, he'll hang for what he did. Webb's expression was grim. But the man was right about one thing. He does have friends. This fight isn't over yet, Miss Reynolds. Voss will hire the best lawyers money can buy. It could be months before this sees a courtroom, and every day until then you'll be in danger from Circle 5 hands looking to help their boss. The temporary relief Clara had felt evaporated. So what do I do? Just hide and wait? You rebuild. The voice came from the doorway, rough and familiar and impossible. Clara spun around, and there was Elias, dusty from hard riding, with exhaustion written in every line of his face. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and stopped in front of her, his gray eyes searching her face. You rebuild your ranch, you rebuild your life, and you show Voss and everyone like him that you can't be broken. That's how you win. Elias? Clara's voice broke on his name. She wanted to throw herself into his arms, but they were in a room full of people, and there were rules about such things, even now. You came back. I promised I would. He pulled the deputy's badge from his pocket and handed it to Webb. Found Price, got the evidence, rode 2 days straight to get here, though it looks like you handled things fine without me. Price beat you here by half a day, Webb said. But your timing's not bad. Miss Reynolds could use some friendly faces about now. The crowd was dispersing, people filing out to spread the news across Haven Creek and beyond. Within hours, everyone in the territory would know that Randall Voss had been arrested for murder. Within days, the story would reach papers as far as Denver and San Francisco. The cattle baron who thought he owned Wyoming had finally been brought down by a 19-year-old girl who refused to stay silent. Outside the town hall, Clara stood on the steps and looked out at Haven Creek. The sun was high overhead, painting everything in sharp relief. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the mill running and children playing and life continuing on like it always did. What are you thinking? Elias asked quietly, standing beside her. I'm thinking my father would be proud. And I'm thinking I have no idea what comes next. Clara turned to look at him. The ranch is gone. I have no money, no prospects, just a land claim covered in ashes and a cattle baron who wants me dead. Where do I even start? You start by not being alone. Ida joined them on the steps, her face set with determination. The boarding house is yours as long as you need it. And I've got some money saved, not much, but enough to help you get back on your feet. We're family, Clara. We take care of our own. And you've got people who'll help rebuild. Elias gestured to where several townspeople were approaching, including old Silas Perkins riding a mule that looked older than he was. Word's already spreading. Folks who were too scared to stand up to Voss before are going to be lining up to help the girl who brought him down. Silas dismounted with a grunt and tipped his hat to Clara. Heard what you did in there? Took guts. Your pa would be bursting with pride. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. This here's the deed to my old claim up by Cascade Creek. It's played out for gold, but there's good timber in a spring that never runs dry. I'm too old to work it anymore. Figure you could use it to get started again. Clara stared at the deed, tears pricking her eyes again. Silas, I can't. You can and you will. Martha always said the best way to honor the dead is to help the living. So take it, build something good, and name your first daughter after my wife. That's payment enough. He pressed the deed into her hands and remounted his mule before she could argue further. Over the next hour, more people came. The mill owner offered timber at cost. A rancher she'd never met promised seed cattle come spring. A seamstress brought 2 dresses she'd made, saying every woman needed proper clothes. Small gestures, most of them, but they added up to something that felt like hope. By the time they walked back to the boarding house, Clara's arms were full of donated supplies, and her heart was full of something she couldn't quite name. The deputies had escorted Voss to the territorial jail in Buffalo, and Webb promised to station men at the Raymond house until the trial was concluded. That evening, after dinner and after Ida had retired to her room, Clara found Elias on the front porch again. He'd cleaned up from the trail and changed clothes, but the exhaustion still showed in the set of his shoulders. 2 days of hard riding, Clara said, settling into the chair beside him. You must be dead on your feet. Worth it, though I'm sorry I wasn't here when you faced Voss. That must have been hard. It was, but I did it. Actually stood up and told the truth and didn't back down even when he tried to twist everything. Clara was quiet for a moment. I keep waiting to feel different, like bringing Voss to justice should have changed something inside me. But I still feel broken. Is that normal? Broken things can be mended. Elias's voice was soft. Won't happen overnight, but it happens. You'll wake up one morning and realize you slept through the night without nightmares. You'll catch yourself smiling at something small. Bit by bit, you'll put yourself back together, and you'll be stronger for it. Is that what happened to you after your sister? Eventually. Took years, but eventually. He turned to look at her. And it helped to find something worth fighting for. Someone worth protecting. The weight of his gaze made Clara's breath catch. Elias, about what you said the other night. You don't have to respond. I wasn't asking for anything. I know, but I want to. Clara reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. When you found me in that grass, I thought my life was over. I'd lost everything, and I was ready to die. But you wouldn't let me. You carried me through the darkness, and you held me when the nightmares came, and you never asked for anything except that I keep fighting. And somewhere along the way, I stopped being afraid of the dark because I knew you'd be there. Clara, let me finish. She squeezed his hand. I don't know what the future holds. Don't know if we'll get through Voss's trial alive, or if I'll ever stop seeing my father's face in my dreams. But I know that when I imagine tomorrow, you're in it. And that has to mean something. Elias was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. It means everything, he said finally. But Clara, you need to understand what you'd be taking on. I'm not an easy man. I've got demons and debts and more blood on my hands than most men see in a lifetime. Your father was a good man who would have wanted better for you than a worn-out lawman who doesn't even have a place to call home. My father would have wanted someone who'd keep me safe and treat me right. Someone who'd stand beside me when things got hard instead of running. Someone who sees me as strong instead of fragile. Clara turned to face him fully. That sounds like you to me. I don't have money, don't have property, don't have anything to offer except yourself, and that's more than enough. Clara leaned closer, her heart hammering. Unless you don't want... He kissed her then, cutting off her words. It was gentle and careful, nothing like the rough urgency she might have expected. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. I want, he said quietly. God help me. I want more than I have any right to. Then take it, take me, take tomorrow and the day after, and every day we manage to survive. Claire's voice was fierce. I'm done being scared, Elias. Life's too short and too hard to spend it alone when you could be with someone who makes you feel whole. They stayed like that for a long time, foreheads pressed together, hands clasped tight. Around them, Haven Creek settled into night, and the stars came out one by one. Somewhere in Buffalo, Randall Voss sat in a jail cell. Somewhere in the mountains, the ruins of the Reynolds Ranch slowly succumbed to weather and time. But here on this porch, two broken people held on to each other and dared to imagine a future that didn't hurt quite so much. The trial came 3 months later, in January, when the mountains were buried in snow and the whole territory seemed to be holding its breath. Clara and Elias traveled to Cheyenne with Marshall Webb and half the town of Haven Creek, people who'd decided that bearing witness mattered, that standing together was the only way to face down men like Voss. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Clara testified again, this time in a real courtroom with Voss glaring at her from the defendant's table. Samuel Price testified too, appearing long enough to present his evidence before disappearing back into whatever new life he'd built. Other witnesses came forward, ranch hands who'd seen things and stayed silent, townspeople who'd been threatened, even a few Circle 5 employees who decided their loyalty had limits. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned with a guilty verdict on all counts, Clara felt something inside her finally unclench. Justice, real justice, was possible after all. Randall Voss was sentenced to hang. He went to the gallows 3 weeks later, still cursing and threatening to the end. Clara didn't attend the execution. She'd seen enough death. But she felt it when it happened. Felt the world shift slightly, becoming a place with one less monster in it. By spring, the snow had melted and Clara was ready to rebuild. She sold what remained of her father's land to a family of homesteaders from Missouri, keeping only the water rights. Those she donated to the town of Haven Creek, ensuring no one else could try to monopolize the resource that had cost her father his life. With the money from the sale and donations from townspeople and Silas's timber claim, she began planning. Elias had stayed through the winter, taking work as Webb's deputy when the marshal offered it. He'd moved into the boarding house properly, in a room down the hall from Clara's, and if anyone in town thought it was scandalous, they kept it to themselves. The man who'd brought down Randall Voss had earned his place in Haven Creek. On a warm day in May, Clara and Elias rode out to Silas's old claim with a wagon full of supplies. The timber claim sat in a valley carved by Cascade Creek, with tall pines and clear water, and enough flat land for a cabin and maybe some livestock. It was beautiful and empty and full of promise. "This is it," Clara said, dismounting and looking around. "This is where we start over." Elias climbed down beside her. Over the winter he'd put on weight, and the haunted look had faded from his eyes. He looked younger now, or maybe just more alive. "We? Well, I can't build a ranch by myself, and Webb said you're wasting your talents playing deputy in a quiet town." Clara turned to face him, her heart in her throat. "I was thinking maybe you'd want to be partners, run cattle together, build something that's ours instead of just mine. Unless, yes." He didn't let her finish. "Yes to all of it. Partners, ranch, future, all of it." Clara laughed, the sound bright and clear. "You didn't even let me finish the proposal." "Didn't need to. I've been waiting for you to ask since December." He pulled her close, his arms circling her waist. "I love you, Clara Reynolds. Have since somewhere around the time you shot that Circle 5 hand and barely blinked. Figured I should probably mention that before we go into business together. I love you too. Have since you held me through that first terrible night and didn't ask for anything I wasn't ready to give." She tilted her face up to his. "So, partners in business and in life? Partners in everything." He kissed her then, long and deep and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, the sun was high overhead, and the valley spread out before them like a canvas waiting to be painted. They were married in June in Haven Creek's small church, with half the town in attendance. Ida cried through the whole ceremony. Marshall Webb gave Clara away since her father couldn't be there to do it. Silas played his cracked fiddle for the dance afterward, and if the music was more enthusiasm than skill, no one complained. Clara wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Ida had commissioned from Denver, with her mother's locket at her throat and wildflowers in her hair. Elias wore his best suit and looked uncomfortable in it until Clara whispered that he was still the most handsome man she'd ever seen. He relaxed then, his smile soft and just for her. They spent their wedding night in the half-finished cabin at Silver Haven Ranch, the name they'd chosen for their new spread, honoring both the creek that ran through it and the town that had given them shelter. The cabin was barely more than walls and a roof, but it was theirs, built with their own hands and the help of friends who'd proven that community mattered. "Tell me something true," Clara said as they lay together in the darkness, her head on Elias's shoulder. It had become their tradition over the long winter, trading truths in the quiet hours. "I never thought I'd be happy again after Rachel died. Never thought I'd want to build something instead of just drifting. But you changed that. You gave me a reason to stay in one place and put down roots." His arm tightened around her. "What about you? Tell me something true." "I still miss my father every day. Still see his face sometimes and forget for a moment that he's gone. But the grief doesn't crush me anymore. It's just part of who I am now, someone who loved and lost and kept living anyway." Clara tilted her face to kiss his jaw. "And I'm grateful. For surviving, for finding you, for getting to start over in a place this beautiful." They lay quiet for a while, listening to the creek outside and the wind in the pines. Through the unfinished window, stars blazed in impossible numbers. "Do you think he'd approve?" Clara asked softly. "My father. Of us, of this ranch, of the life we're building? I think he'd be prouder than words could say. You took everything Voss threw at you, and you not only survived, you won, built something good from the ashes. That takes strength most people don't have." Elias pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Your father raised a warrior, Clara, and warriors don't just fight. They build, they protect, they create something worth defending." Over the next few years, Silver Haven Ranch grew. They ran cattle in summer and cut timber in winter, building a modest but profitable operation. Elias proved to have a head for business that surprised them both, and Clara's fierce determination to make the ranch succeed drove them through hard times and good. They hired hands when they could afford it, treating them fairly and paying honest wages. Word spread that Silver Haven was a good place to work, and they never lacked for help when they needed it. Ida visited often, bringing preserves and gossip from Haven Creek. Marshall Webb stopped by whenever his rounds took him near, always finding an excuse to share dinner and check that they were doing all right. Even Silas made the journey once or twice a year, his mule growing grayer but no less stubborn. In the spring of 1878, Clara gave birth to their first child, a daughter they named Sarah, after Clara's mother. She had her father's gray eyes and her mother's stubborn chin, and from the moment she drew her first breath, she owned both their hearts completely. 2 years later came a son they named Thomas, for the grandfather he'd never meet. He was quieter than his sister, thoughtful and kind, with a gift for animals that reminded Clara achingly of her father. Life on Silver Haven was hard but good. There were years when drought or harsh winters tested them, times when money was so tight they weren't sure they'd make it through. But they always did, together. Clara learned that love wasn't just the dramatic passion of those first desperate days. It was also the steady comfort of someone who'd rub your sore feet after a long day, who'd hold you when the nightmares came, who'd stand shoulder to shoulder through every storm life threw at you. On a summer evening years later, Clara stood on the porch of their expanded cabin, now a proper house with glass windows and a stone fireplace, and watched her children play in the meadow. Sarah was teaching Thomas to skip stones in the creek, her laughter carrying on the warm breeze. Behind her, she heard Elias's footsteps and felt his arms come around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, resting his chin on top of her head. "Everything. Nothing. How far we've come from that night in the line shack." Clara leaned back against him. "Do you ever miss it, the wandering, the freedom of not being tied to one place?" "Not even once." His voice was absolutely certain. "This is where I was meant to be. With you, with them, building something that lasts. The only horizon I need is the one with you in it." Clara turned in his arms and kissed him, still finding joy in the simple freedom of being able to do so whenever she wanted. "I love you, Elias Grant. Have I mentioned that today?" "Not since breakfast. I was starting to worry." But his eyes were warm with humor and love and contentment. They stood together on the porch while the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Their children's laughter echoed across the valley. The creek sang its eternal song. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed and a hawk called as it hunted in the gathering dusk. This was what they'd fought for, Clara realized. Not just survival or justice, though those things mattered. They'd fought for this, the quiet miracle of an ordinary evening, a family built on love instead of fear, a future they'd carved out of tragedy and loss and sheer, stubborn refusal to give up. Her father was gone. That grief would never fully heal. But he lived on in the land he'd loved, in the daughter he'd raised to be strong, in the grandchildren who carried his name and his values into a new generation. Randall Voss had tried to erase the Reynolds family from Wyoming territory. Instead, he'd created something stronger, a legacy of courage that would outlast anything he'd ever built. As darkness fell and the stars emerged, Clara and Elias went inside to gather their children for bedtime. Sarah protested that she wasn't tired yet. Thomas wanted just one more story. It was chaos and noise and beautiful and exactly what Clara had never dared to dream might be possible that terrible night when she'd run through burning grass expecting to die. Later, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Clara stood at the window of their bedroom and looked out at the ranch they'd built together. Elias came to stand beside her, his hand finding hers in the darkness. "No regrets?" he asked softly. Clara thought about everything she'd lost and everything she'd found. Thought about the girl who'd fled through flames and the woman who'd rebuilt from ashes. Thought about the stranger who'd held her through the worst night of her life and the man who still held her every night since. "Not a single one," she said. "This life, this love, this family, it's everything I never knew I needed. And I'd walk through fire all over again if it meant ending up right here with you." They stayed at the window for a while longer, watching moonlight paint silver across the valley. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. There were fences to mend and cattle to check, and 1,000 other tasks that made up the reality of ranch life. But tonight was for gratitude, for remembering how far they'd come and how much they'd overcome to stand here together. The man who'd once asked nothing had given her everything: safety, justice, partnership, love, and a future bright with possibility. And the woman who'd thought her life ended in flames had learned that sometimes you had to lose everything to find what truly mattered. In the bedroom down the hall, Sarah stirred in her sleep and murmured something that might have been her grandfather's name. Thomas shifted in his crib, one small hand curling into a fist like he was already preparing to fight for what was his. And on the porch, the rocking chairs Elias had built creaked gently in the night breeze, waiting for tomorrow's stories. This was Silver Haven Ranch, built on blood and love and the kind of stubborn courage that turns tragedy into triumph. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It wasn't easy, but it was worth every struggle. And as long as Clara and Elias drew breath, it would stand as a testament to the truth that some things are worth fighting for, and that love, real love, can be found even in the darkest of nights. The cowboy who'd held her and asked for nothing had become the man who gave her everything. And the girl who'd never slept beside a man until that terrible night had become a woman who couldn't imagine sleeping anywhere else but in his arms. Their story had begun in fire and fear, but it ended here, in peace and hope, and the quiet certainty that they'd found exactly where they belonged. Together, always together. Home.